Chapter 415. As for why the fishbowl sword would turn into Gu Yun's body in the water, the experts of later generations, after sufficient research and scientific proof, finally concluded that the fishbowl sword must have been born from the abdominal cavity of a large fish in the river. That was why the fishbowl sword liked to eat fish so much. In response, another group of experts gave a resounding rebuttal. Damn it, since the fishbowl sword was born from the belly of a fish, then it was also the flesh and blood of a fish. How could it like to eat fish? This was illogical. Therefore, as for why the fishbowl sword turned into Gu Yun's body after being thrown into the river, there had always been different opinions and no definite conclusion had been reached. Bai Jie found Gu Yun and wanted to bring her back to his house to do that kind of thing. In the end, he was discovered by Qing Pin halfway, and after a series of twists and turns, Gu Yun was brought home by Gahan. After losing the fishbowl sword's body, the sword element in her body was lacking, and she fell into a coma. It wasn't until Gahan absorbed a large amount of dimensional crystals for her that the fishbowl sword woke up. According to the fishbowl sword, when it first woke up, its body was completely controlled by Gu Yun's soul. Although Gu Yun vaguely felt that her body was no longer a normal human's body, she didn't know about the fishbowl sword's existence, and only thought that she had come back from the dead. Later, on the day Gu Han set off from Yuzhong City, Gu Yun, who was in the recreation room, suddenly sensed the existence of her real body. She immediately rushed over to find her real body. That was how Gu Han snatched the dagger from the three girls. Later, Gu Han guessed that the fishbowl sword body must have floated along with the water, and was finally picked up by the three girls. After finding her body, Gu Yun immediately understood her situation. She knew that she was actually the fishbowl sword's sword mistress, but due to various unforeseen events, she lost her body and became human. In fact, at this time, Gu Yun had two choices. One was to give up becoming a sword mistress, so that she could stay by her brother's side as a human. The other was to insert the fishbowl sword's body into her body and turn her back into a sword mistress. Originally, Gu Yun was in a dilemma between these two choices. Her human nature made her resist becoming a sword maiden, but the sword maiden's spirituality kept tempting her to stab the Yu Chong's sword into her body. It was not until that day, when Gahan went to rescue Yi Wenjun, that Gu Yun saw with her own eyes how her brother fought. She suddenly had a desire to become her brother's helper and not his burden. Once this desire was born, Gu Yun's fate of turning back into the fishbowl sword could not be reversed. Before Gahan could return to the car, Gu Yun directly stabbed the fishbowl sword into her stomach. Gu Yun needed a lot of time to fuse with the original body, so Gu Yun began to live as a zombie for a few days. It was not until Gahan arrived at Changyang Mountain and was about to enter the training formation that the fusion came to an end. Gu Yun also persuaded her good friend, Qing Pin, to secretly stay in the same scabbard as Qing Pin and sneak into the training formation. But Gu Yun didn't know that she hadn't completely fused with the original body. She was only halfway through the fusion process, and the fishbowl sword still needed to be inside Gu Yun's body to fuse with her soul. After a few days in the training formation, the fusion finally came to an end. The fishbowl sword that had fused with Gu Yun's soul returned to its original appearance as a dagger. But after going through so many twists and turns, the fishbowl sword's original appearance had also undergone a world-shaking change. From the original fishbowl sword that looked full of slaughter, magnificence, and blood, it had become an ordinary white boar dagger that looked like a child's toy. When the fishbowl sword, or rather, Gu Yun, finished narrating her experiences, Gahan sat on the ground in a daze for a long time. He had never thought that Gu Yun and the fishbowl sword would go through so many twists and turns, such a complicated experience, and become like this. Gahan didn't know whether or not he should accept the fact that his little sister had become a sword mistress. Logically speaking, Gahan couldn't accept it. He wanted Gu Yun to be his little sister, a human, and not a sword mistress. But in reality, Gu Yun was already a sword mistress, and Gahan had to accept this fact. At the same time, Gahan's heart was filled with vexation. He'd actually always suspected that Guyun wasn't his little sister, and that she was a spy sent by someone else with ulterior motives. Hadn't the fish-bowl sword and his little sister's soul fused at the same time that he was paying respects to his parents and little sister in Unju Hall? Hadn't the alarm by Jie heard from Unju Hall come from the explosion of his parents' cinerary urns? It must have been at that time that Guyun's soul escaped from Unju Hall and then was absorbed by the Yuchong sword. In this way, everything could be explained clearly and clearly. The fish-bowl sword was his little sister, and his little sister was the fish-bowl sword. From now on, Guyun and the fish-bowl sword would fuse together and become a sword mistress. What Gahan didn't know was that this coincidence had led to an unprecedented feat in human history. A human soul could actually fuse with a sword mistress's body and become a true sword mistress. This discovery was so important that it could completely change the human world. Of course, the current Gahan didn't care about this. Even if he knew, he would hide it deeply until he had enough power to decide his own fate. Only then would he announce his little sister's identity. Before that, he would make his little sister his sword mistress. That's right, making his little sister his sword mistress was something that Guhan had to do. Guhan definitely couldn't accept his little sister becoming another man's sword mistress. He had finally reunited with his little sister with great difficulty, and he had to stay with Guyun forever. Unless Guyun found a man she liked one day. Otherwise, Gahan definitely wouldn't let go of Guyun. Gahan didn't think that if Guyun really became his sword mistress, then before he died, she wouldn't fall in love with another man. Otherwise, it would be a tragedy where they could never be together. Some readers might ask, didn't Gahan already coordinate the heavenly sword? How did he coordinate the fish-bowl sword? This wasn't logical. I don't know if everyone still remembers how Guhan snatched the Yu King Gojian sword from Kenzu in his darkest state at the beginning of the book. That's right, it was the sword mistress grafting technique. It was Guhan's first time using the grafting technique. Although Guhan felt a little guilty, he still felt that his actions were necessary. He had no other choice. He wouldn't hurt anyone else. However, that was in the game. This time, Gahan discovered that he could use the grafting technique in real life. The fish-bowl sword at this moment perfectly met the requirements of the grafting technique. The grafting technique's requirements were that the sword mistress had already nurtured a sword infant, but it was still a step away from becoming a complete form. Therefore, when Gahan used the grafting technique for the first time, he couldn't wait for the Yu King Gojian sword to come out of the fleeting year calendar's belly. Instead, he had to forcefully break open the fleeting year calendar's belly and extract the Yu King Gojian sword infant to complete the synchronization. To put it simply, he had to seize the sword infant before the sword mistress established a complete connection with the Yu King Gojian sword. This time, the fish-bowl sword didn't stay in Bai Jie's belly at all. It only borrowed a bit of Bai Jie's bloodline power to start the synchronization. Although Guyun had transformed into a physical body, her main body wasn't in her body, so she couldn't establish a connection with other Yu King Gojian sword. Only when her main body completely fused with her did Guyun return to a normal sword mistress and establish a connection with other Yu King Gojian sword. This was the best state to use the grafting technique. At this time, Guhan only needed to inject the sword essence in his body into Guyun's body, and he would be able to synchronize with Guyun's body, obtaining an additional sword maiden of the innate artifact sword level, and thus being able to cultivate the incomparably powerful yin-yang sword technique. However, when Gahan held the fish-bowl sword's hilt, Gahan hesitated again. Once the sword essence was injected, Guyun would really become his sword maiden. Would the relationship between him and Guyun be that of a brother and sister, or a sword wielder and sword maiden? How would he face Guyun in the future? These were all questions that Gahan was hesitating about and conflicted about. More importantly, once he used the grafting technique, even if Gahan didn't hurt anyone or did anything deliberately, fate would send the fish-bowl sword to his doorstep. But once he used it, he still couldn't change the fact that Gahan had used a crooked technique. The grafting technique wasn't a good thing. It was full of evil in itself. It didn't matter in the game, but who knew if it would bring misfortune in the future if he used it in real life? More importantly, Gahan had sworn that he would never use the grafting technique in real life. This was Guhan's principle. Once he injected the sword essence into the hilt, all of Guhan's vows would become a joke. Big brother, what are you hesitating for? Big brother, don't you want Guyan anymore? Guyan urged in Gahan's ear. It was because of this urging that Guhan finally made up his mind to inject his sword essence into the hilt of the fishbowl sword without hesitation. What a joke. His sister wanted to be with him forever, and as her brother, he couldn't reject her. In the eyes of future generations, a great era had begun. More than half of the main characters of this era would stay in the belly of Chanyang Mountain, and the world would change because of them. As for whether this change was good or bad, nobody knew. Chapter 416. The sword Maiden grafting technique, as the name implied, was to break a branch from a pear tree and plant it on an apple tree. Although it could also survive with the support of the apple tree's roots and bear fruit with the advantages of both apples and pears, the pears growing on the apple tree were rootless duckweeds. However, the pear growing on the apple tree was a rootless duckweed. If one day the wind blew the radar and broke the grafting technique, the apple tree could continue to live, but the pear branch would be dead. It was the same for the sword mother grafting method. Although it was the same as other sword mothers, it only relied on the synchronization and coordination of a single sword element. Not to mention the sword nascent soul in the Purple Mansion. There wouldn't even be a little bit of special change. Moreover, there wouldn't be any sword mark in the Purple Mansion of the wielder. If there was any change, the sword mother would be the first one to suffer. This was one of the reasons why Guhan hesitated to graft the Yuchong sword. However, when Gahan poured the sword element in his body into the Yuchong sword and synchronized it with the Yuchong sword, the Yuchong sword unexpectedly drilled into Gahan's body and entered his Zifu. This change shocked Gahan. Could it be that the Yuchong sword was petrified like the other sword maidens and synchronized with it? However, although the Yuchong sword had entered Gahan's body showed no signs of petrification. Instead, his body became more and more spirited. Guhan immediately entered into the state of inner vision and submerged his spiritual consciousness into his Zifu and saw an amazing scene in his Zifu. At this time, there were 3 sword maidens' sword marks in Guhan's Zifu. One was the Qingpin sword, which was the most at ease. The other sword stayed in the center of the Zifu and silently watched the other 2 sword maidens fight. Yes, the other 2 sword maidens were fighting. The Yuchong sword that had entered Guhan's body was fighting with the heavenly sword mark that was originally in Guhan's Zifu. The Yuchong sword seemed to want to occupy a place in Guhan's body, but the heavenly sword's reaction was very fierce. She did not want to let the Yuchong sword stay there. The 2 sword ladies were entangled with each other, and they were in conflict with each other. When Guhan's divine sense entered the Purple Palace, the 2 swords were about to fight. The swords of both sides were constantly colliding with each other in the Purple Palace, from one end of the Purple Palace to the other, and then back again. The fight was very intense, and both of them were really angry, and they began to use all of their strength to fight. Seeing this situation, Guhan's divine sense was burning with anxiety. If they continued to fight, not only would one of the 2 sword maidens be injured or even die. What was even more frightening was that if his Zifu was destroyed by the sword marks, then his life would be over. The Zifu was something that could not be healed by any medical chamber. The Zifu was a very mysterious place. A person's spirit could sense it and even see it, but no equipment could detect it. Therefore, some people speculated that the Zifu was the place where the human soul, spirit, and body met. It was the most important place for humans, and fighting in this place was the most fatal thing. As mentioned before, the reason why a sword wielder couldn't coordinate with 2 innate sword ladies of the same level was because the sword marks of the innate sword ladies of the same level would instinctively repel each other, just like the human body's rejection reaction. Once the sword marks of 2 innate sword ladies of the same level entered the Zifu, the sword wielder would basically die. Originally, Gahan thought that he could avoid this result by using the grafting technique to obtain the Yuchang sword. This was because the sword maidens obtained through the grafting technique would not form sword marks in the body. However, he never expected that the Yuchang sword would actually enter Gahan's body and cause this battle with the heavenly sword mark. Guyun, Etion, can you hear me? Hurry up and stop. Do you want to kill me? Helplessly, after Gahan's divine sense entered the Zifu, he did not have any combat strength. He could only watch as the two sword maidens or sword marks fought in his body. Gahan could only try to communicate with the two of them and resolve this battle. Big brother, I want to fight with big sister Etion. Yin only wants to leave her sword mark in the Zifu, but big sister Etion is chasing Yin. Yin can only resist. Guyin did not say anything, but a thought flew into Gahan's divine sense, allowing Gahan to understand Guyun's meaning. Don't look for this heroine. This heroine also doesn't want to fight with your sister. However, I can't control the sword mark at all. It has already completely broken away from my control. If you don't believe me, try controlling it yourself. Etion also sent a thought over, saying that she couldn't control the sword mark and that everything was moving on its own. The sword mark was a mark that the sword maiden used her own soul and the sword maiden's body to leave in the sword wielder's body. It was an important way to help connect the sword maiden and the sword wielder. The sword wielder could also use the sword mark to increase the sword maiden's combat strength. The sword mark was not only controlled by the sword maiden. The control of the sword mark was in the hands of both the sword wielder and the sword maiden. If one had to compare, then the sword wielder's control over the sword mark should be above the sword maiden's. This was because the sword wielder could use the sword mark to issue orders to the sword maiden, but the sword maiden could not do this. Therefore, in theory, Gohan's control over the sword mark should be above the heavenly sword. Gohan tried to use his divine sense to control the heavenly sword's sword mark to stop its attack on the fishbowl sword. However, the heavenly sword's sword mark simply didn't listen to any of Gohan's commands. It chased after the fishbowl sword with all its might, wanting to fight to the death. This time, Gohan was truly helpless. He watched as the battle between the two sides became more and more intense. It looked like his purple palace was about to be destroyed in the hands of these two madmen. Yin, leave this place. Please, Yin, leave Big Brother's purple palace first. Gohan couldn't control the heavenly sword, so he could only ask Guyun to leave his purple palace, because it seemed that the fishbowl sword's body had entered Gohan's purple palace. The control of the body was still in Guyun's hands. In other words, as long as Guyun left this place, this battle that could endanger Gohan's future and life could end here. Big brother, don't you want to be with Yun forever? When Guyun heard Gohan's command, her heart trembled. A flaw appeared in her control over the fishbowl sword, and she was hit by the heavenly sword again and again. In an instant, she fell into a disadvantageous position. Of course I want to be with Yun. When you two left me 12 years ago, I swore that I would rather lose my life in exchange for you two returning to my side. But Yin, even if you leave Big Brother's purple palace, you can still stay by Big Brother's side. However, if Big Brother's purple palace is destroyed by you two, Big Brother's life will be over. Gohan explained very sorrowfully. Is that so? Yun-Air's struggle will cause Big Brother to lose his life? The fishbowl sword came to a sudden realization. In the end, it was once again hit by the heavenly sword many times. I'm sorry, Big Brother. Yin-Air doesn't know about these things. Yin-Air will leave Big Brother's purple palace right now. The fishbowl sword dodged the heavenly sword's attacks and flew towards the edge of the purple palace, preparing to leave Gohan's purple palace. Thank goodness. Thank goodness Yun-Air is sensible. Gohan let out a sigh of relief. As long as the fishbowl sword leaves his purple palace, everything will return to normal. Seeing that the Yuchang sword was about to fly out of the range of a Zifu, Gohan silently felt that the Yuchang sword's attitude was so resolute that there was even a feeling of life and death, like the wind was rustling and the water was cold. No, I absolutely can't let the fishbowl sword leave my purple palace. This thought suddenly popped up in Gohan's heart. He didn't understand why he would have such a thought, But Gahan knew that once Gu Yun left his purple palace, he might lose his little sister forever. Yin Air, stop. Yin Air, I won't allow you to leave this place. Gahan's intuition had saved Gahan many times, so this time, Gahan still chose to believe in his intuition. He frantically transmitted his thoughts to Gu Yun, hoping that she would stop. No, brother, Yun Air can't watch you die. Everything is Yun Air's fault. Let Yun Air redeem everything. When Gu Yun heard Gahan's words, she walked even more resolutely. She was about to leave the range of the Purple Palace and return to the outside world. I won't allow you to leave. In the Purple Palace, Gahan didn't have any fighting strength, but he had another privilege. Because this was Gahan's Purple Palace, Gahan's divine sense could instantly appear anywhere in the Purple Palace. It didn't even need a billionth of a second. It was the true meaning of zero-time difference teleportation. Gahan's divine sense instantly appeared in front of the fishbowl sword, using his own divine sense to block the path of the fishbowl sword. Brother, Gu Yun realized that her brother's divine sense was blocking the path, so she immediately braked, abruptly stopping the rapidly moving fishbowl sword. The fishbowl sword was an external object. Once it pierced Gahan's divine sense, it would cause great damage to Gahan's spirit. Gahan might become an idiot or a vegetable, so Gu Yun had to stop. She would never let her brother suffer even a little bit of harm. Gu Yun couldn't bear to hurt Gahan, but the heavenly sword scar that was chasing after Gu Yun was not necessarily the same. The heavenly sword scar, which was instinctively controlled, took advantage of the moment when the fishbowl sword suddenly stopped and abruptly hit the body of the fishbowl sword. Ah! Gu Yun let out a blood-curdling scream. Cracks appeared on the blade of the fishbowl sword, and she was instantly seriously injured. What was even more frightening was that, because it was hit by the heavenly sword scar, the originally stopped fishbowl sword once again moved forward, piercing into Gahan's divine sense. A pain that felt like a 1,000-gene hammer had smashed into his head, engulfed Gahan's consciousness. The fishbowl sword stab was extremely serious. An entire blade had pierced through Gahan's divine sense. What would happen if a watermelon was pierced by a watermelon knife? It was very simple. The entire watermelon would split into two. Gahan's divine sense, which had been pierced, was the same. The divine sense, which was originally like a ball of light, began to slowly split, just like a watermelon that had been split into two. Brother! Gu Yun let out a heart-wrenching cry. She had never thought that there would be a day when her sword would pierce through her brother's divine sense. What was the difference between this and personally killing her brother? On the other side, even though Gahan's divine sense had begun to split, the heavenly sword scar did not plan on stopping. It continued to attack the fishbowl's sword in a frenzy, attempting to completely shatter it. This action completely infuriated Gu Yun, and she sank into a frenzy of rage. She pulled her sword out from Gahan's divine sense and immediately launched a desperate attack at the heavenly sword scar like a mad tiger. This attack was not the same as the previous battle where she held back. Under the stimulation of Gahan's divine sense splitting, Gu Yun let go of all her hands and feet. She let go of all her apprehensions and began to fight with her life on the line against the heavenly sword scar. It was a battle where only one of them would survive, or rather, they would all die together. At the same time, Gahan's divine sense entered a state of unconsciousness. Boundless darkness enveloped Gahan, and Gahan felt as if he had returned to the darkest moment of his life 12 years ago. Chapter 417. It's over. I can't feel Gahan's consciousness anymore. Qingpin's sword scar, which had been watching from the sidelines, inexplicably turned for the worse. Gahan's consciousness had been split in two by the fishbowl sword, and the furious fishbowl sword had begun to fight Yi Tiansheng to the death. Qingpin could no longer watch calmly, and the entire sword scar began to shake violently. As it shook, it muttered to itself, "Hey, hurry up and come out. What are you doing? Don't you know that every second I come out wastes a day's worth of accumulation? Last time I helped you clean up the mess, I wasted a full 5 years of accumulation. I'm not going to do this in profitable business. Although the voice also came from Qingpin's body, it wasn't the voice of a cute little girl like Qingpin. It was more like a 17 or 19-year-old girl's voice. If Gahan could hear this voice, he would definitely react. Isn't this young girl Qingpin's voice? There's no time. Hurry up and save Gahan, he's about to die. The cute Qingpin said anxiously with a sobbing tone. At this time, most of Gohan's consciousness had already been split apart, and only a small part of its tail was still connected. As time passed, this last bit of connection continued to decrease. Once the consciousness was completely separated, Gahan would become a complete idiot. How did this lowly mortal become like this? The young girl Qingpin was also stunned. She looked at the situation in the purple palace and immediately became angry. Is this stupid mortal a fool? He can actually control 2 natural sword maidens of the same level at the same time. If he wants to die, he should go to the Antarctic Sea and bury himself. That way, he'll die more quickly. Don't say any more. Hurry up and save Guhan. Guhan is really going to die. The cute Qingpin pleaded. No, I don't care about him. He asked for it. Why should I save him? The young girl Qingpin firmly refused. Don't worry, he won't die. At worst, he'll just become a vegetable. As long as his body is still alive, that's enough. It can also save me a lot of trouble. No, Qingpin has to save him. Qingpin must save him. I know, you must have a way to save him, right? From the cute Qingpin's choking voice, it could be seen that Qingpin had already cried, and he was crying very sadly. I won't save him. If I save him, all my efforts for 100 years will be for naught. I will never save him. Hearing the cute Qingpin crying, the young girl Qingpin hesitated for a while and finally rejected the cute Qingpin again. All right, if you don't want to save him, I'll go save her. The Qingpin sword mark suddenly shook and then began to move, flying rapidly towards the location of Guhan's consciousness. Stop, you idiot. What are you trying to do? The young girl Qingpin panicked. I don't want to do anything. I just want to save Guhan. I want to forcefully break the seal and heal Guhan's consciousness. The cute Qingpin cried. You're crazy. If you forcefully break the seal, both of us will be finished. We'll have to go back to that damn sword burial ground for a few 100 years. No, you idiot, you can't do that. You'll get us killed. The young girl Qingpin was also a little crazy. What was going on? Was that damned Guhan so important? Unfortunately, just like the young girl Qingpin firmly rejected the cute Qingpin's request, the cute Qingpin also ignored the young girl Qingpin's words. He wholeheartedly wanted to fly to the side of Guhan's consciousness without a trace of hesitation. All right, I know. Stop, I'll go save him. Even the stupidest person would come up with a right compromise after comparing a few 100 years with 100 years. The young girl Qingpin was finally subdued by the cute Qingpin's stubbornness and said reluctantly, What a wastrel, the young girl Qingpin muttered. Then, 2 golden rays of light shot out from the sword mark of Qingpin's sword and shone on Guhan's consciousness. This caused the last bit of Guhan's consciousness that was still connected to it to finally break apart. As the golden rays of light continued to shine, Guhan's consciousness gradually began to reform. In the end, the consciousness that was almost split in half finally gathered back into its original ball of light. However, Guhan's consciousness did not recover. There was still a crack in the middle of the consciousness that could be seen with the naked eye. Once the golden light that protected Guhan's consciousness disappeared, Guhan's consciousness would probably split again. At this moment, a dark green thing shot out from the sword mark of Qingpin's sword. It was different from the light from before. This dark green thing did not look like light, but more like a semi-solidified latex. Once this dark green latex came into contact with Guhan's consciousness, it was like water meeting a sponge. It was directly absorbed by Guhan's consciousness. With the injection of the dark green latex, the crack in Guhan's consciousness also began to heal. It seemed that very soon, Guhan's consciousness would be completely restored. What bad luck! The treasure that I obtained with great difficulty is gone just like that. Seeing the dark green latex disappear from Guhan's consciousness, the young girl Qingpin's heart was filled with heartache. Where'd she find such a good thing in the future? Guhan, that's great. Watching Guhan's consciousness return to normal, the adorable girl Qingpin's heart calmed down. The entire sword mark of Qingpin's sword also calmed down, no longer restless like before. What's so great about it? If these two stupid women did not stop fighting, I'm afraid that this Zifu would not be able to live past today. The young girl Qingpin sneered. You go tell you sausage, just say that the human's consciousness has already been cured, and let her quickly leave Zifu. Otherwise, all of us will be finished. But in this way, isn't you sausage dead? The adorable girl Qingpin was stunned for a moment. Although she had only been together with Guiyun for a week or two, the two Lolas also had an unpleasant history of fighting over Guhan's embrace. But the adorable girl Qingpin had become friends with Guiyun in the end. Thinking that her friend was about to die, Qingpin's heart was naturally extremely reluctant. Guiyun's body was not bred from a human Zifu. Her body is not complete, and she must leave a sword mark in a human Zifu to nourish herself. Therefore, Guiyun abandoned her original body and forcibly entered Guhan's Zifu, hoping to reconstruct her body and patch up the final hole. If you let Guiyun leave Guhan's Zifu now, then not only would Guiyun not be able to nourish her body, but she would also lose her original body, and her body and mind would be destroyed. What does that have to do with us? The young girl Qingpin didn't care about Guiyun's death. I've already lost 100 years of effort. Do you still expect me to lose another 1,000 years to save this fish bowel sword? If you continue to be willful, I don't mind annihilating you. At worst, I'll go to the sword burial zone for another 500 years. The adorable girl Qingpin was silent. She knew that the young girl Qingpin was not joking. She had forced her a moment ago, and it had already made her angry. She only agreed to save Guhan's life because she was unwilling to part with her 500 years of effort. As for the remaining fish bowel sword, it was impossible for her to make a move. Guiyun, I've already restored Guhan's consciousness. Hurry, hurry, hurry up and leave this place. The adorable girl, Qingpin, choked on her words 3 times before she finally said them. Hearing this, Guiyun turned her head and looked in Guhan's direction. Sure enough, she saw that Guhan's consciousness had already been restored. Her violent emotions instantly disappeared, and all that was left was her endless love for her brother. I understand. I'll leave now. Goodbye. Guiyun no longer tangled with Etion. She took 2 slashes from Etion, and at the cost of a few more cracks on her body, she once again flew towards the edge of the Zifu. Once she flew out of the Zifu, what awaited Guiyun would be the destruction of her body and mind. Goodbye, big brother. Guiyun is already satisfied to be able to be with you for so long. Goodbye, big brother. We won't see each other in our next lives. 2 drops of tears suddenly seeped out of the fish bowel sword's hilt. In this world, no one had ever seen the appearance of the sword lady's actual body crying. This scene was so poignant, yet so heart-wrenching. Everyone who saw this scene would sigh endlessly. The so-called tragedy was nothing more than this. Unfortunately, our story is not a tragedy. At least, it won't be a tragedy here. When the fish bowel sword was about to leave the Zifu, Guhan's consciousness suddenly moved. From Guhan's consciousness, 2 streaks of dark green latex shot out. It was the same latex that had just healed Guhan's consciousness. From the looks of it, the 2 streaks of dark green latex shot out by Guhan weren't as much as the one shot out by Qingpin. It seemed like Guhan's consciousness had used up a lot of this latex. However, the remaining dark green latex was enough to save the fish bowel sword. The latex shot out by Guhan split into 2. One flew towards the fish bowel sword, while the other flew towards the heavenly sword and the fish bowel sword. The 2 latex hit their targets at the same time, completely wrapping up the 2 sword lady sword scars like steam buns. The green latex was the skin, and the sword scars were the filling. When the green latex completely wrapped up both sides, the heavenly sword still wanted to attack the fish bowel sword, but something miraculous happened. The two sword maidens suddenly began to approach each other. It wasn't their blades that approached each other, but their hilts that approached each other. I don't know if everyone has seen this kind of weapon before. They were originally two swords, but as long as the tips of the sword hilts were pushed together, then with a light rotation, the two swords would become a double-headed sword. At this moment, the heavenly sword and the fishbowl sword were in such a state. The dark green latex seemed to form a kind of adhesive, gluing the fishbowl sword and the heavenly sword's hilt together in the purple palace, becoming a double-headed sword. Like this, it was impossible for the heavenly sword to attack the fishbowl sword, just like how a dog would never be able to bite its own tail. Guyan, hurry up and leave your sword scars. Reconstruct your fleshly body, hurry. Guyan, who was in a daze because of her own state, suddenly heard Gahan's instructions. Although she didn't understand why, she still quickly acted. A small egg-like object flew out of the fishbowl sword's body, then floated in Guhan's purple palace, and quickly began to develop abnormally. In an extremely short period of time, the ovum turned from a small ball into an infant with 4 limbs and distinct facial features. After the infant finished developing, it immediately flew out of the purple palace. Just like a normal sword maiden, it would once again change into the appearance of a sword maiden outside the purple palace. The only thing left in the purple palace was the fishbowl sword's sword scar, which was similar to the heavenly sword's conjoined twins. Chapter 418. The heavenly sword and the fishbowl sword scars were connected in a very strange way. Although the heavenly sword's scars still had the urge to destroy the fishbowl sword scars, an iron rod would never be able to touch its buttocks without an external force. At most, it would only spin on the spot. As a result, the heavenly sword's scars and the fishbowl sword's scars existed in harmony. This was something Gahan had never expected. For Gahan, what he just experienced was truly a reincarnation from the gates of hell. In the darkness, Gahan could even sense the summoning of an unknown space. A warm current pulled Gahan's soul back. His divine sense solidified once more, and Guhan's consciousness was restored. The moment Gahan's consciousness recovered, Gahan saw the fishbowl sword, which was trying to escape from the purple palace for the second time in hopes of sacrificing its life to save Gahan. Gahan had originally wanted to use the old-fashioned method to stop the fishbowl sword, but at that moment, Gahan suddenly heard a voice. The voice told him that the liquid in Guhan's divine sense could save the fishbowl sword and the heavenly sword. Only then did Gahan realize that his divine sense had inexplicably gained a warm, dark green latex. It was this latex that had just saved Gahan from the brink of life and death. Gahan made a prompt decision and followed the mysterious voice's instructions. He split the dark green latex in his divine sense into 2 parts and poured them into the heavenly sword and the fishbowl sword. This led to the scene that had just happened. With the help of the mysterious power of the dark green latex, Gahan had finally harmonized the 2 irreconcilable sword scars. He had solved a problem that no one had ever been able to solve before. He now had 2 natural sword ladies of the same level. As for the mysterious voice that had helped Gahan and the latex that had restored Gahan's divine sense, it wasn't as if Gahan was completely clueless. This was because this voice sounded extremely similar to I Ching's voice. It was as if it was being broadcasted from a loudspeaker. Gahan gently stroked the dark green ring on his finger as he muttered to himself. Was it your arrangement that saved me again? I Ching, how much do I owe you? It had to be explained that Gahan had a huge misunderstanding. He thought that the green latex, the mysterious voice, and even the power that had healed his consciousness had come from the same place. They had been arranged by the heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor. Gahan didn't know that what really saved him was Qingpin's sacrifice, because when Qingpin did all that, Gahan was in endless darkness. Due to various reasons, Gahan had such a small misunderstanding. What will be the consequences of this misunderstanding in the future? All of this is a puzzle that no one knows. All right, all of the problems seem to have been solved perfectly. Guyan had completely become a real sword maiden, and all the hidden dangers had been resolved. She could be with Guhan forever, and the obstacle that had been blocking her from cultivating the yin-yang swordsmanship was also gone. Everything seemed to be perfect for Guhan to be able to cultivate the superb swordsmanship that was comparable to the 100 million swords technique of the Lun Yin family. However, there were still repercussions. In other words, Guhan had a huge hidden danger, and that was what to do with his famed sword maiden. The reason why the sword maiden grafting technique could ignore the rule that one could only have one sword maiden per level was because the sword maiden created by the sword maiden grafting technique didn't need to have a sword mark, so it didn't take up space in the Purple Palace. However, the sword mark of the Yuchang sword had already entered Guhan's purple mansion, which meant that the sword maiden grafting technique had failed halfway. When Guhan had 10,000 cork sword elements, it was a big question mark whether he could synchronize with the famed sword maiden. If this caused Guhan to be unable to synchronize with the famed sword maiden, what would happen to the king of Yu in the game? These are all huge problems. Unfortunately, it was impossible to find the answers to these problems in a short period of time. As such, Guhan decided to put these headache-inducing problems aside for now, and think about it when he had to face it. Once upon a time, Guhan hated this kind of negative way of dealing with things, but when things really happened to him, Guhan sadly discovered that it was the only way to deal with it. Guhan's consciousness returned to his brain, and he regained control of his body. He saw the naked Gu Yun lying in front of him. There was not a single blemish, scar, or hair on her body. Her jade-like body was laid out in front of Guhan. The blood in Guhan's body naturally reacted, and it was an extremely strong reaction. It was as if he wanted to transform into a wolf. Damn it, this is your blood sister. You bastard. Guhan cursed at himself in his heart. However, he also knew that this couldn't be blamed on him. This was a disaster caused by the 3 green lotus swords. Guhan sucked in a breath of cold air. He took out a set of Qing Pin's underwear from his dimensional pocket and placed it on Gu Yun, intending to help her put on the clothes. He didn't want to be attracted by his own blood sister's body and do something absolutely absurd. In the end, when Gu Han opened up a pair of underwear facing the little bear's head and prepared to put on Gu Yun, a situation that made people's blood boil even more. If he wanted to put on Gu Yun's underwear, he would naturally have to pry open Gu Yun's legs. Once he did, he would naturally be able to see the absolute domain between her legs. For Guhan, who was currently experiencing the effects of the 3 green lotus swords, this was no different from a heavy bomb. Guhan only cast a careless glance and then immediately turned around. He used his will to continuously suppress his body, and only then did he suppress the explosive desire. Big brother, what are you doing? At this time, Gu Yun woke up. She saw that Guhan's back was facing her, and his body was continuously trembling. He was also dripping with sweat, so she asked in a very strange manner, Big brother, is getting you some clothes? You can put these clothes on yourself. Guhan let out a long sigh of relief. All right, Gu Yun had woken up. She could put on her own clothes, and he wouldn't have to torture himself anymore. No, I want Big Brother to help me put them on. Unexpectedly, Gu Yun directly threw herself into Guhan's arms. Such a cute little sister wants Big Brother to help her put on her clothes. You won't refuse, right? Gu Yun remembers that when we were young, Big Brother said that he liked to help me put on clothes the most. Guhan was speechless. He shut his eyes tightly, deeply afraid that if he looked at her one more time, he wouldn't be able to control his body's desire. You're so annoying. Big Brother pervert, you wouldn't have any bad thoughts about your own blood sister, would you? Gu Yun seemed to have smelled something, or perhaps she felt something hard between Guhan's crotch. She asked with a smile, Nonsense, put on your own clothes. Guhan threw away the clothes in his hands and ran to another corner of the room, leaving Gu Yun, who had thrown the clothes on the ground, to sulk. This is the fish-bowl sword? Guhan held the original fish-bowl sword in his hand. After another incubation, the fish-bowl sword didn't return to its original appearance. It still had the appearance of a white dagger. It seemed that the fish-bowl sword of the past could no longer return. Not only the appearance of the sword maiden, but even the appearance of the sword itself had completely changed. But this was also good. This way, He wouldn't have to worry about someone guessing that the fish-bowl sword was actually in Gahan's hands based on Guyun's appearance. The disappearance of the fish-bowl sword would also become an unsolved mystery. Until Gahan could control his own fate, perhaps the truth could be announced. In a sense, the fish-bowl sword was no longer the fish-bowl sword. It might be more suitable to call it the Guyun sword. Of course, Gahan would never call a sword by his own sister's name. Gahan had to give his sword maiden that Guyun had turned into a new name to avoid trouble in the future. Gahan thought for a long time and felt that he should still keep the word fish in the fish-bowl sword to represent respect for the former fish-bowl sword. After all, the fish-bowl sword had made great contributions to humanity. Completely erasing its former name was also an extremely heartless thing to do. Then, Gahan asked Guyun what word she liked. After all, Guyun was the one who came up with the name, so she needed to consider her own opinion. After thinking for a long time, the word battle jumped out of Guyun's mouth. Gahan didn't ask her why she chose such a name. He nimbly placed the word battle in front of the fish-bowl sword. From now on, the world would have one less fish-bowl sword and one more Doyu sword. Gahan and Guyun discussed it. Guyun wanted to appear in this world in human form as much as possible. Unless it was absolutely necessary, she definitely couldn't reveal the fact that she was also a sword maiden in front of others. This was because if Guyun revealed the fact that she was a sword maiden, then there would be too many things that Gahan wouldn't be able to explain. The first thing he would do was to explain how Gahan could have 3 sword maidens at the treasure sword level. After deciding on these matters, Gahan began to cultivate the yin-yang sword art. Apart from natural sword maidens of the same level, there was actually another requirement to cultivate the yin-yang sword art, and that was that the 2 sword maidens had to have the same level of depth. This was easy to deal with. There were quite a lot of sword mark dust and fragments left in Gahan's hands. Gahan first deepened the Doyu sword and the heavenly sword to the 8th grade. This way, the 2 sword maidens would have the same level of depth. After that, he needed to go through a series of extremely complicated cultivation procedures. There was no need to explain them one by one. In any case, there was no point in explaining them one by one. This was the final step of practicing the yin-yang sword formula, and that was to connect the sword marks on Yuchang and Heavenly Reliant sword to the main meridians of the sword wielder's body. Then, they would have to complete a great chi cycle. This was an extremely long process. Controlling the meridians of the entire body was a slow and steady process. Just completing it once would take Gahan an entire 10 days. What was even more frightening was that this process couldn't be interrupted. Once it was interrupted, there would be the danger of chi deviation. As a result, Gahan did not eat or drink during these 10 days. He focused all his attention on maintaining the circulation of the entire great circulatory cycle. The heavens took pity on him. There were no more unforeseen events during this period, and he successfully completed this process. This was also the reason why Gahan was delayed in his room for 10 days. He only returned to the finishing point on the 12th day. Of course, this also seemed to explain why Gahan ate so much like a reincarnated hungry ghost. After all, he had been starving for 10 days. Chapter 419. The memories ended, and time returned to the time when Gahan was facing off against Isis. Although the fish-bowl sword had become the Doyu sword, and its appearance had changed greatly, the Doyu sword's skills hadn't changed at all. At least, her basic skill, Pursuing Shadow, hadn't changed at all. Basic skill, Pursuing Shadow, continuously consumes sword essence to enter the state of Pursuing Shadow, allowing the sword maiden's attack speed and movement speed to change according to the enemy's movements. The amount of sword essence required for pursuing the shadow was inversely proportional to the sword maiden's own swordsmanship level and body speed. The higher the level of the sword maiden's swordsmanship and physical fitness, the less sword essence she consumes. The skill can only capture the speed of Yuan Ko, who is one realm higher than the sword wielder. Simply put, Pursuit was a skill that allowed 2 opponents with a huge difference in strength to pull their speed to the same level. This was also the reason why Gahan was able to keep up with Isai's attack speed the second time he faced her. It was because of this skill that increased Gohan's speed to the same level as Ice Size. Based on this alone, it could be seen just how powerful Yin Yang sword technique was. Gohan was originally just a treasured sword, but once he mastered Yin Yang sword technique, he had the physical attributes of Heavenly Sword and Doyu Sword, which were the strongest and second strongest sword ladies in the treasured sword realm. When they worked together, his physical attributes would not be any lower than the bonus a sword lady could provide to a sword wielder. Therefore, Gohan's current strength could already be considered at the level of a famed sword. That was the only way the Doyu Sword's pursuing shadow could catch up to Ice Size speed. This was because Ice Size was a meteor-level Yuan Shun, which was one major realm and two minor realms higher than a famed sword-level sword mistress. Doyu Sword could only capture the speed of a Yuan Shun that was one major realm higher than Gohan. This meant that even though Gohan was only a treasured sword-level sword mistress in name, her strength had already reached the level of a famed sword level. Isis has the fishbowl sword. Oh, I should call her the Doyu Sword now. Gohan held two swords in his hands and looked at Isis, the female bear, proudly. With my Doyu Sword, you can't win against me. Oomph. The fishbowl sword can only increase your speed, but your attack and defense are still at the level of a treasured sword. How could Ice Size, be afraid of you? You just have to take a hit from my claw, and it'll be time to send you back. Ice Size said angrily. That's right. I can't take your full attack. Although Gohan said so, the expression on his face was very disdainful. But the premise is that you can attack me. It's not that I look down on you, Isis, but with your appearance, you will never be able to hit me in your lifetime. Isis was about to explode. What's wrong? Are you angry? Gohan continued to mock him. Am I wrong? Don't tell me you don't look like a bear. Gohan was right. Isis did look like a bear. I'm going to kill you. Ice Size finally couldn't take it anymore from Gohan and used another flash. This time, Ice Size didn't plan to hold back. She wanted to kill Gohan. As for how she would be punished by Sky covering Jindy after killing Gohan, Ice Size couldn't care less. I said you can't attack me. Facing Ice Size flash attack, Gohan naturally flashed behind Ice Size. The Heavenly Sword and the Doyu Sword smashed into Ice Size back at the same time, leaving a bloody mark on her body. And so, one man and one bear started flashing around the room. Ice Size's strategy was very simple. First of all, she was a meteor stage Yuan Ko, and her defense and HP were much higher than Gohan's. A mere bloody mark couldn't even deal 1/10,000th of Ice Size's HP, so she wasn't afraid of Gohan's exhaustion at all. On the contrary, Ice Size wanted to exhaust Gohan by relentlessly chasing after Gohan to exhaust Gohan. She wasn't exhausting Gohan's HP. After all, she couldn't hit Gohan. What she wanted to exhaust was Gohan's stamina. Gohan borrowed the Doyu Sword skill and used the body of a famed sword to display the speed of a meteor stage. Even if Gohan was a genius, his stamina and sword essence weren't enough for him to fight for a long time. Once Gohan's stamina ran out or his sword essence was exhausted, what awaited Gohan would be death. If Gohan lost his speed, Ice Size could easily crush him to death. Of course, Gohan knew this. Gohan was very clear about his own body's condition. He couldn't start a long battle with Ice Size. After synchronizing the Doyu Sword, Gohan's sword essence had exceeded 4,000 quarks, which was a third more than before. But compared to a meteor stage, which was equivalent to hundreds of thousands of elements, it was nothing. It was impossible for Gohan to exhaust Ice Size. Therefore, if Gohan wanted to defeat Ice Size, he had to use some tricks. And this trick was to anger Ice Size from the beginning, so that she would attack him crazily without caring about anything else. Originally, Gohan was worried that Ice Size, who had lived for thousands of years, had a good temper. What if he couldn't anger her? But now, it seemed that Ice Size was too easy to anger. Just one sentence was enough to make Ice Size lose her calm. This was too calm, too unscientific. Later, when Gohan recalled this experience, he felt that external factors must have affected Ice Size's emotions. Perhaps it was the thing that made Ice Size suddenly go crazy and even made Ice Size lose control of her emotions. When Ice Size continued to attack crazily, all of Gohan's attention was not focused on dealing with Ice Eye's attacks. On the contrary, most of Gohan's spirit was nailed to Ice Eye's face, and only some of his remaining energy was used to deal with Ice Eye's attacks. In any case, Ice Eye's attack was too clumsy. Not only could it not compare to Gohan, it could not even compare to the majority of the sword-bearers outside. If those sword-bearers had the same speed as Ice Eye's, each of them would be able to beat Ice Eye's in close combat. So the question was, why was Gohan staring at Ice Eye's face? Was Ice Eye's face as beautiful as a fairy's? Of course not. Isis had a bear's face. Even if she was a beautiful female bear that was rarely seen in 4,000 years, it made no difference to Gohan. What Gohan really cared about was Ice Eye's nose. For a bear, its nose was its biggest weakness. A bear's nose was very sensitive. It could smell things more than 10 kilometers away. This was why bears could eat honey. They could always smell the sweetness of a beehive from a few kilometers away. The reason for this was that a bear's nose was a collection of a large number of bear's nerve tissue. This nose not only gave the bear an unparalleled sense of smell, but also a fatal weakness. There was once a story about a drunkard from a fighting race who encountered a bear while walking. This drunkard was not afraid when he saw the bear. Instead, without saying anything, he directly threw a punch at the bear's face. Then, something unbelievable happened. This drunkard actually knocked out the bear with a single punch. Of course, the drunkard was not possessed by Saitama and became a one-punch drunkard. He was just an ordinary person. His punch did not even have the power to shake the huge bear, let alone knock it out. The reason for this was that his punch landed squarely on the bear's nose. As mentioned before, a bear's nose was full of nerve tissue. It was super sensitive. In other words, sensitive was sensitive. When the drunkard's fist landed on the bear's nose, it was the equivalent of breaking through the protection of the human skull and landing a punch directly on the human's brain. It would be strange if the bear did not faint after receiving a fatal blow in such a place. By the way, here's a small suggestion for everyone. If you want to experience the feeling of a bear's nose being smashed, but you don't want to punch your own head, I suggest that you prepare a bottle of essential balm and apply it on your fingers. Then gently rub it on your little head. If there are female readers, you can also rub it on your little bean. This way, you can experience the feeling of a bear's nose being smashed. Bears were very clear about this weakness. So while bears would try their best to protect their nose and not give the enemy a chance to attack their nose, it was the same for Ice Eyes. In the beginning, even when she was attacking, Ice Eyes would deliberately protect her nose so that Gohan could not attack her weakness. However, when Ice Eyes fell into a frenzy and began to attack crazily, this weakness was inevitably exposed. In order to pursue more attacks, Ice Eyes naturally ignored the protection of her nose. That was an opportunity for Gohan. I see it. Gohan's eyes lit up. In an instant, Gohan noticed that Ice Eyes' hand had completely left her nose. Her attention was completely focused on Gohan, and she had completely forgotten about her nose. How could Gohan give up this rare opportunity? Yin-Yang fusion. At that moment, Gohan suddenly merged the heavenly sword and the Doyu sword in his hands. When the two swords came into contact, they mixed together like water, forming a strange blue and red sword. This sword was the new sword mistress born from the fusion of the heavenly sword and the Doyu sword through the Yin-Yang sword secret art. The power of this brand new sword mistress was undeniable. Ice Eyes felt something like a beam of light flashing in front of her. Then, all the pain that could not be described by words exploded in her brain. In less than a second, Ice Eyes passed out. Her nose was still a bloody mess, and her original appearance could not be seen clearly. Chapter 420. It was almost impossible to defeat Ice Eyes completely because Ice Eyes was too tanky. Even if Gohan used up all his sword elements, he wouldn't be able to cause any serious damage to Ice Eyes. Knocking Ice Eyes unconscious was the best option. The final gate guarded by Ice Eyes was now open. Gohan only needed to walk in gently to see the last thing Jijindi left behind. I bet 50 cents that this person will go back in less than 10 seconds. Reinhardt said angrily as he watched Gahan go in. He was frightened by Gahan's counterattack just now. He finally regained his senses and said fiercely, "Maybe he can last more than 20 seconds." Liu Ling sheathed the Yi sword and said coldly, "Impossible. He's not a descendant. How can he last more than 20 seconds? This is impossible." Reinhardt said confidently, "Look down on him. Do you dare to bet with me? I think this person can last more than 20 seconds." Liu Ling said proudly, "Let's bet. Let's make this clear. I won't do it if the stakes are too low. If you want to bet, let's bet." Before Reinhardt could finish his sentence, he heard a crisp, bell-like laughter. "Reinhardt, why are you still betting? 20 seconds have passed while you were talking." This was Lydia's voice from Berlin City. Although Lydia's intention was to mock Reinhardt, she accidentally saved Reinhardt's life. Reinhardt swallowed the stakes that he had already said. Liu Ling glared at Lydia angrily. Lydia finally reacted and immediately looked at Liu Ling with a pitiful and apologetic expression. Speaking of which, 20 seconds should be the longest battle time other than the descendant of Zhejiandi. Messi, one of the twin stars of Buenos Aires, said this was the first time he had taken the initiative to talk to someone. Most of the time, he was either passively answering some questions or flirting with his sister, Melanie, intimately with each other. "My dear good brother, you're wrong. It's already 30 seconds. Mei Lan teased. "Oh, I'm wrong. My dear good sister is still smarter." "No. Actually, my dear good brother is smarter." Well, the two of them were caught up in the endless display of affection between brother and sister. However, what they said was the truth. Gahan had already lasted 30 seconds, but there was still no notification of failure. Didn't this mean that Gahan was still fighting inside? Everyone began to panic. They strained their ears to listen to the notification of failure that could come at any time. At the same time, a small sapling began to sprout in their hearts. They could not help but ask themselves, does the swordsman from Yuzhong City have the slightest chance of succeeding? As time ticked by, the 30 seconds became 1 minute, then 5 minutes, and finally 20 minutes. The notification of failure still did not appear, but the sapling in their hearts had already grown into a towering tree. Many of the swordsmen already believed that the swordsman from Yuzhong City had a chance of defeating Yuan Ko, who had tortured them all. "Hey, little fellow from Zetian family, come here. Let me ask you, is the person who just entered your family?" Reinhardt walked up to Yi Wenjun with a menacing look on his face. He was just short of grabbing Yi Wenjun and asking him a question. No. The Liunian family only has one descendant. I'm the only one in this generation. I don't have any other siblings." Yi Wenjun immediately replied, F*CK. Does that guy really have the ability to defeat that troublesome she-bear? Reinhardt slammed his sword on the ground and asked Yi Wenjun, "Then let me ask you again. What's the name of the person who just entered? Which family is he from?" Since it was possible for Lionheart to defeat the Guardian Yuan Shun and obtain the reward from the endpoint, Lionheart had to pay more attention to Lionheart. He could not let his guard down and had to grasp all the information about Lionheart. It would be of great use later. No matter how stupid Yi Wenjun was, he could tell that Reinhardt was up to no good. He was indebted to Guhan, so he couldn't just give away the information about Guhan. Thus, Yi Wenjun clenched his teeth and shook his head. I can't tell you. Reinhardt did not expect a weak-looking guy like Yi Wenjun to dare to defy him. He was furious and decided to teach the kid a lesson. However, before he could do anything, Liu Ling stood in front of him. "Enough, Reinhardt. You're getting more and more useless. Do you still want to attack our comrade? I still haven't charged you with the crime of suddenly attacking Guhan. Don't you want to spend a few years in our Yin Jing City's discipline committee?" "No, Miss Liu Ling must be joking. How would I dare to touch the descendant of Zetian Jindi? I just want to know the name of that handsome guy. I want to be friends with him. Is it wrong to be friends with him?" Reinhardt said plausibly. "Reinhardt, you don't have to interrogate this little guy. I know about that person. Let me tell you." Suddenly, Ashma, who had been silent, said in a loud voice that everyone could hear, That guy's name is Gahan. He was born as a commoner in Yuzhong City. However, his master is Cloudy Sword Immortal Lulei. His sword is the Heavenly Sword. He's also a sword master with outstanding swordsmanship. You will never be able to defeat him. Ashma's words caused waves in the crowd. Everyone was shocked by the news that Ashma had just said. Commoner? A sword immortal's disciple? The Heavenly Sword Immortal's sword master? And a sword master whose swordsmanship was even better than Reinhardt's? When these conditions were put together, most of the sword bearers present began to feel ashamed of their inferiority. Disregarding everything else, just the heavenly sword in the other person's hand was the object of everyone's envy and jealousy. It must be known that everyone present was a sword bearer of the treasure sword level. The heavenly sword was publicly recognized as the #1 sword master in the treasure sword level. The sword master that hadn't appeared in the world for 350 years had actually appeared again. Didn't that mean that the other person was the #1 sword bearer in the treasure sword level? Was he the most powerful person present? Ashma, how reliable is your information? How do you know all this? Reinhardt asked in a deep voice. If what Ashma said was true, then Gahan was definitely a powerful opponent. There would be many variables in the operation later. Reinhardt had to find out whether what Ashma said was true or not. Of course it's true. It was Miss Liunian Ling who told me about Gahan's name and master. As for the heavenly sword in his hand, I personally experienced it. She really is a powerful sword master. In that narrow road battle, my future sword was completely defeated by Lady Heavenly Sword. As for his swordsmanship, Reinhardt, don't tell me you've forgotten the strike he used before he left? Ashma's words were reasonable and convincing. At the very least, Reinhardt was rendered speechless by Ashma's last sentence. That sword strike was probably something that Reinhardt would never forget for the rest of his life. Just as everyone was discussing Gahan, the male version of Jindi's voice that they had been waiting for finally rang out. Some trial takers have reached the final finish line. The final finish line will be opened in an hour. Everyone can enter and take a look. It was a long period of silence. No one could believe that someone had actually defeated the terrifying Yuan Ko. F*CK. Suddenly, Reinhardt slapped his thigh. In an hour, all the good stuff has been taken away by that person. Where the heart is. After Gahan entered the final finish line, he found that there were 2 identical doors in front of him. The words "where the heart is" were written in the middle of the 2 doors. What does this mean? Are you asking my heart to make a choice? Gahan pursed his lips and chose the door on the left without hesitation. The reason was simple. The door on the left was carved with a bunch of strange words from an unknown civilization. Other people would not be able to understand these words, but Gahan could recognize them at a glance. Weren't these the same words he had carved on the back of the statues of the 3 Egyptian gods to fool Batet? Jijindi had written these words in front of the door. It was obvious that he was inviting Gahan to walk through this door. Gahan took a step forward and pushed the door open. Suddenly, an extremely strong suction force erupted from the gate. Gahan did not resist at all and was sucked in by this suction force. When he woke up again, he was already in a fairy tale-like world with lush green grass stretching into the sky. Gahan's location was a clean, dark green grassland. In the distance, there was a lush forest. Beside the forest, there was a shallow stream. The sky was decorated with twinkling lights, like stars in the night. Countless cute little animals lived in this world. In just a glance, Gahan saw no less than 20 pure white rabbits, pheasants flying everywhere, brownish-red foxes hiding in the bushes to peep at Gahan, and birds constantly singing in the trees. This was simply a fairy tale-like world, especially when Gahan saw a candy house in the middle of the grassland. Gahan had once read such a fairy tale passed down from before the apocalypse. It was said that a kind which built a beautiful candy house and then invited all the cute children to play in the candy house. Once upon a time, Gahan would accompany this fairy tale to sleep. Gahan's wish for a year or 2 was to be able to see such a candy house with his own eyes and then enjoy delicious candy in the candy house forever. Unfortunately, This wish of his had been buried in the abyss by Guhan when his parents had died. Who would have thought that on this day, the scene in front of him would evoke his memories again? Chapter 4:21. Gahan woke up from his memories. Although he did not know why the final destination was such a fairy tale-like place, there was no doubt that this was a place that made Gahan feel relaxed from the bottom of his heart. The air here was filled with a sweet fragrance that seeped into one's heart. It made Guhan feel an inexplicable desire to spend the rest of his life here, ignoring all kinds of hatred and battles in the outside world. However, this thought did not exist for long before it was completely eliminated by Gahan. If he succeeded in the future and the world was at peace, perhaps Gahan would be willing to come here and live in seclusion. But now, Gahan still needed to fight for humanity, not be a coward here. After a closer look, Gahan found that the entire fairy tale-like world was built in a large cave. Although there was a sun in the sky, it was actually a superfluorescent lamp that would not go out for a long time, the kind that had a power of hundreds of thousands of watts. The stars in the sky should also be something similar to the LED flash of a mobile phone. The surrounding walls were all painted with murals of the sky. It seemed to be an endless space, but in fact, it was only a small space of less than 10 acres. For example, this was like a crystal world that was decorated in a home. A glass ball the size of volleyball had a small world inside. There was water, houses, trees, people, and even snow in that world. But at the end of the day, it was just a toy. I wonder how Jatian Jinni managed to keep this world intact for more than 700 years. Guhan silently pondered. To isolate such a closed world from the Earth's own ecosystem, it would require a lot of black technology to complete. For example, the things that these trees needed for photosynthesis, the nutrients that the trees needed to grow, the balance of the ecosystem, and so on were super complicated problems. In Jatian Jindi's era, technology had not fully recovered to the era before the Great Destruction. How do these things be built? Well, this trial formation itself is a miracle. Compared to the trial formation, this small fairy tale-like world is not a difficult thing. Guhan shook his head, then released all the sword maidens from his scabbard. Where is this? It's so beautiful. The first one to jump out was the cute Qingpin. She was still wearing her favorite crocodile costume today. Her little head was in the crocodile's mouth, looking very cute. Gu Yun, on the other hand, was wearing Qingpin's sister's suit, a shark suit. Her head was also inside a shark's mouth. This set of clothes was given to Gu Yun as a gift by Qingpin after Gu Yun was reborn. He said that the two of them would be good sisters from now on. They would enjoy happiness together, eat meat together, and lie in Gahan's embrace together. He also chased away the other women who coveted Gahan's embrace. In short, the two sword maidens instantly became a pair of good friends and sisters. Needless to say, when Gu Yun and Qingpin were wearing crocodile and shark costumes and holding hands, exploring this novel fairy tale world, Gahan suddenly felt that they were really a pair of twin sisters. Gahan, let me ask you, where is this place? Why is it so beautiful? Although she was wearing a meaty crocodile costume, Qingpin still skillfully climbed onto Gahan's neck, grabbed Gahan's ear, and asked Gahan. I also don't know where this place is, but it should be an interesting place. Gahan pulled Qingpin down from his body. You two have fun here for a while. You've been fighting and cultivating for the past few days. It's really been hard on you too. Take this opportunity to have a good rest. Whether we can encounter such a beautiful place in the future is still a huge question mark. All right, let's go play. Qingpin grabbed Gahan's hand. The two cute little things wagged their tails and ran into the depths of the forest. Gahan turned his head to look at Yi, who was beside him. You're not going to play? No. He waved his hand lazily. These past few days, I've been tortured by you and fish guts to the point that my bones are about to break. As for my sword mark, even though it's slightly better than before, I still can't completely control it. I just want to fight to the death with the Doyu sword behind me. I'm so annoyed by it that I'm about to die. Then let me ask you, how did it feel when you fused with the Doyu sword for the first time? Gohan asked after some thought. The fusion that Gahan was talking about was the fusion of the Doyu sword and the heavenly sword when he dealt with Aisai's last attack. Gahan didn't know how many attacks he had to hit Aisai's nose to make her faint. Gahan only had one chance to kill her. If he failed that time, Aisai's would definitely not expose her nose to Gahan again. That was why Gahan had to use his strongest attack. And the strongest attack in the yin-yang sword art was undoubtedly the attack that the two sword ladies combined into one to form a new sword lady. The yin-yang sword secret art had 5 realms. Due to the lack of time and his lack of strength, Gahan had only mastered the first 2 realms. The first realm was called yin-yang intersection. It allowed the sword wielder to hold 2 sword ladies at the same time. At the same time, the physical attributes of the 2 sword ladies would be added to the sword wielder's body. It was worth noting that this yin-yang intersecting buff could only be activated when the wielder held both swords at the same time. When 2 sword maidens fought alone, they would not be able to activate the buff of their physical attributes. In other words, in order to use the yin-yang intersection buff, Gahan had to fight in his swordmaster form. The second realm of the yin-yang sword secret art was called yin-yang combination. It allowed the 2 sword ladies to fuse into one and form a new swordmaster. This way, when the swordmaster came out to fight, the attributes of the 2 sword ladies would be added together. There was no need for the sword wielder to fight personally. If the sword wielder fought personally, their strength would increase by another level. Controlling a swordmaster with twice the physical attributes of 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 a swordmaster was amazing. This was the strongest attack that Gahan could use. From the results, it could be seen that the effect of this attack was very obvious. Although a bear's nose was the weakest part of a bear's body, no matter how weak its defense was, with the Isis Meteor level Yuan Ko as a foundation, its defense wouldn't be too bad. At the very least, it would have the defense of an ordinary Nether level Yuan Ko. Gahan's strongest attack was able to pierce through the Nether level Yuan Ko's defense. This proved that Gahan already had the ability to fight against a Nether level Yuan Ko. It wasn't like when he defeated Isis by attacking the opponent's weakness and knocking him unconscious. Instead, it was a true victory by completely destroying the opponent's body. It's not that great. It feels like a child was stuffed under my body, and this child isn't even my own, and it's stuffed back into my body when it's 5 or 6 years old. Etion's criticism was very sharp, allowing Gahan to understand Etion's feelings just by listening. But it's not without benefits. At least I experienced a feeling that I've never experienced before, a feeling of power that I've never felt before. Etion stretched. Just because of this feeling, when we have to fuse in the future, let me fuse as much as you want. I'll help you defeat all your enemies. After saying this, Etion disappeared. Gahan revealed a smile, got up from the ground, and began to slowly walk towards the candy house. Gahan knew that if Jatian Jindi left something for him, it would definitely be in the candy house. After walking to the front of the candy house, Gahan discovered that it was actually a real candy house. The walls of the candy house were made of dark chocolate, and the decorations on it were inlaid with hard fruit candy of various colors. The white windows looked like they were made of white chocolate, and the steps leading upstairs were filled with golden syrup. The chimney of the house was made of large pieces of ginger candy, and the smoke coming out of it looked like cotton candy. Seeing such a beautiful house, smelling such a sweet smell that was like a childhood dream, Gahan was a little afraid to touch the house, deeply afraid that if he used too much force, he would push this perfect house down. In fact, Gahan was even more afraid that his dirty body would pollute this pure candy house. Gahan never thought that he would be so conflicted. Just 10 seconds ago, Gahan planned to break the door without any hesitation. It was just candy. If he lost his life, why would he care about candy? However, when he really stood in front of this fairy tale building, Gahan began to struggle. He instinctively resisted, unwilling to destroy the beauty of this candy house, unwilling to pollute the purity of the entire candy house. Just as Gahan was in a dilemma, the door to the candy house suddenly opened, and a person walked out. She was holding a tray in her hand, and on it was a golden cicada robe and a pair of snow-white cloth shoes. "Husband, you're already at your own door. Why are you still hesitating? Quickly change into these clothes and go home." A voice that had been repeatedly echoing in Gohan's mind recently said. This voice caused Gohan to shiver from head to toe. He raised his head and saw I Ching's gentle face looking at him affectionately. The corners of her mouth were brimming with a smile of reunion after a long time. "Well, I'm back." Not knowing why, Gohan's heart came up with such a sentence, and then so naturally answered. Chapter 422. Welcome home, my husband. I Ching, who was waiting at the door, had a smile like a flower bud on her face, which made Gohan's heart warm. Gohan even thought that I Ching had been waiting for his return for a few milliseconds. However, Gohan quickly realized that I Ching had already left this world. The I Ching in front of him was definitely not the real I Ching. Gohan carefully observed this I Ching's face and found that compared to the young I Ching in the dungeon, this I Ching looked much more mature. There was a feminine charm and gentleness between her eyebrows. In terms of figure, this I Ching was obviously much taller than the young I Ching. Her body was not like the shriveled little girl he first saw. Every part of her body had become plump. In terms of appearance, this I Ching should be in her 30s. Gohan silently made such a judgment in his heart. However, what made Gohan feel strange was that I Ching's figure was still the same as when she was a young girl, although she was already in her 30s. She was somewhat shriveled, thin, and her buttocks and chest did not rise or fall. She still looked like a tomboy. She did not look like a mature woman in her 30s at all. However, when Gohan thought about it, this should be the most normal appearance. In history, the heaven-covering Jindy had deceived everyone with his identity as a man. If he became as plump as a girl in his 30s, how could he hide it from the eyes of the world? Only by thinking of his current appearance could people not see him as a young man. "Husband, why are you standing at the door? Hurry up and change." I Ching saw that Gohan had been standing at the door and looking at her. She blushed and squatted down. She held Gohan's feet and prepared to help Gohan take off his shoes. "No need, I'll do it myself." Gohan shuddered and immediately tried to pull his leg out from I Ching's grasp, but he didn't expect I Ching's grip to be so strong, and Gohan had to use some strength to jump back. He only heard the sound of a lump, and Gohan's leg was a distance away from I Ching, but I Ching's hand was still holding onto Gohan's ankle. What was going on? I Ching's hands were like rubber as Gohan stretched them 3 to 4 meters away. This truly gave Gohan a fright. "I'm sorry, scared husband." Seeing Gohan's surprised expression, I Ching took a step back like a frightened rabbit. Then, her hand left Gohan's ankle and retracted like a rubber band, becoming a normal arm. "Give me the clothes. I'll wear them myself." Gohan quickly recovered from the shock and said to I Ching. So, I Ching handed the clean clothes and shoes to Gohan. After Gohan changed into them, he stepped into the candy house that originally only existed in fairy tales. "Husband, please." I Ching gently pushed open the door of the candy house. Only then did Gohan see the decorations inside. There was a living room decorated with various bright colors. Inside the living room, there were 2 rooms with their doors closed. There were all kinds of lovely and artistic decorations in the living room. There were some animal head specimens on the wall and many group photos. What surprised Gohan was that although these group photos were group photos, only I Ching's face was in them. The person standing next to I Ching and taking a group photo with her was forcibly cut out of the photo. Who was the person who was cut out? Could it be me? Gohan thought silently. "Husband, take a rest here. Ching, or we'll make tea for you." After I Ching led Gohan into the living room, she pointed to a sofa and asked Gohan to sit down and rest. Then, she walked into a room that seemed to be the kitchen and began to prepare tea for Gohan. Gohan looked at the sofa. It was actually made of sticky candy. The surface was densely covered with a layer of black sesame seeds, forming the skin of the sofa. Not to mention other things, sitting on it felt more comfortable than sitting on a real sofa. There was also a fragrance of peanuts around Gohan. "Husband, Please have some tea. I Ching carried a tea set to the tea table in front of Gahan. Then, she carefully placed the teacups and poured a cup of tea for Gahan. Gahan picked up the teacup. This teacup was actually made of peanut candy. When he tasted the tea inside, it tasted like barley tea. Although barley tea could also be categorized as maltose, it was the closest thing Gahan had seen in this room to its original form. Barley tea was indeed tea. While Gahan was drinking tea, I Ching silently sat beside Gahan. She leaned on Gahan's shoulder and muttered the word husband in a daze. Although Gahan's stomach was full of questions, Gahan didn't say anything. He just kept drinking the bitter barley tea. It was clearly a sugar, but it had a bitter taste. This barley tea was really a magical thing. Husband, don't you want to ask Ching any questions? After waiting for a long time, Gahan didn't ask any questions. Instead, I Ching took the initiative to ask. Yes, Gahan nodded, but we still have a lot of time. You don't have to be impatient. You can still lean on my shoulder for a while. Husband, you're still so good. Ching has no regrets following husband. I Ching hugged Gahan's waist and said in a daze. However, after a while, I Ching helplessly straightened her body. Although Ching also wants to stay with husband for a long time, husband can only stay here for an hour. After an hour, husband has to leave this place. So Ching still has some things to tell husband. An hour? When Gahan heard that there was a time limit, he frowned. Why is there a time limit? Husband, how long do you think this place can exist? I Ching smiled bitterly. In order to preserve this place, Ching extracted all the bacteria and oxygen in it. Then, she used the life confinement array to preserve this place for 700 years. Now that you've entered, the oxygen and bacteria will return to this place, and the shackles on life will be lifted. After all, this is something that goes against the heavens. A life that has been sealed for 700 years will turn into a pile of bones in an hour, and these candies that have been sealed for 700 years will turn into a puddle of stinky water. Therefore, you can only stay here for an hour, husband. So that was why. Gahan believed I Ching's explanation. No wonder this strange place could maintain its beauty for 700 years. No wonder the animals, plants, birds, beasts, insects, and fish were still so lively. It turned out that their lives were all poor people who had been imprisoned. Although this allowed them to defy the laws of nature and live for more than 700 years, the price was that they could only live for about an hour after their resurrection. Even this candy house would probably rot into a pool of black water in a short time due to the corrosion of bacteria and oxygen. You shouldn't have told me this. I don't want to imagine this place being destroyed. Gahan pondered for a while and finally said this. These were Gahan's heartfelt words. He really didn't want to see this place destroyed. He really liked this dreamy fairy tale zone. No matter how beautiful it is, it has to be destroyed. Even Ching will turn into a pool of disgusting water after an hour. So, Ching hopes that husband can leave this place as soon as possible. The sooner, the better. Then, Ching will be satisfied. I Ching said sadly. I Ching, you're also a candy maker, right? Seeing I Ching's expression, Gahan recalled I Ching's arm that could stretch to a few meters long. He naturally had some guesses about I Ching. I Ching was the same as this candy house. They were both made of candy. Husband's wisdom is still so amazing. Even though Ching-er's body has been made flawlessly, husband still saw through it. When I Ching said this, his expression seemed a little depressed and a little excited. A candy man could make these subtle expressions so perfectly. Just as I Ching said, it had reached the point of flawlessness. Even a flawless appearance can't hide the sweet smell on your body. Plus your hand just now. Your hand should be made of gummy candy, right? Gahan said leisurely. No, it's not gummy candy. I Ching stretched out his finger. This is called QQ candy. The scientific name is Wang Zai QQ candy. Wang Zai QQ candy. Why did you give it such a strange name? Gahan asked. This name was too stupid. How could there be such a stupid name in this world? You have to ask yourself this question. This name was given by husband. I Ching's answer made Gahan feel a little ashamed. It turned out that such a stupid name was given by himself. I Ching, can you tell me what's going on with you now? Gohan thought for a while and asked this question. Ching, it was probably a puppet now. I Ching's face was full of smiles. But the real I Ching left a lot of memories for Ching, before he left. Ching, feels that Ching, is the real Ching, and his husband's wife. Is that so? Gohan's heart was full of emotions. What kind of entanglement did this heaven-covering genie have with him? He could feel these feelings from her all the time that even he didn't know what to do. Well, husband, let's not talk about these meaningless things. We should get down to business. I Ching clapped his hands, and a closed door was opened. There was a sound of an electric motor running inside, and a toy truck drove out of the room. There seemed to be something in the back of the truck. Gohan looked at it and saw that there was nothing else in the back of the truck. It was a long sword that was completely black. Could this be the sword lady that Hao Tian Jindi said was about to awaken an emperor's sword? Seeing this sword, Gohan's hair stood on end. Chapter 423. What Emperor's Sword? I Ching had a cute, clueless expression on her face. It's just a famed sword maiden, that's all. This is a famed sword maiden? Gohan extended his hand and held the famed sword maiden in his hand. Because Gohan only had 4,000 points of sword essence, he did not have to worry about synchronizing with the sword maiden while holding it. This was a sword maiden that was completely black from head to toe. To use an analogy, Gohan felt that it was more like a sword maiden carved out of a large piece of graphite. Don't you know what graphite is? Don't worry, go get a pencil and pull out the pencil lead, then you'll see the graphite. Of course, if you get blackened because you pulled out the graphite, then it would have nothing to do with the author. However, although this sword was as black as graphite, it did not leave a mark on Gohan's hand. The shape of this sword was quite simple. It was a rectangular sword hilt with an ordinary blade sticking out of it. If there was anything special about it, it would be that this sword's blade was very long. It was estimated to be about 2 meters long, which was about the same height as a poor person. It would probably be quite awkward to use it, and it would require a special sword technique to complement it. Gohan's fingers touched the blade of the sword bit by bit, using his skin to feel the aura of this sword. Yes, using his skin to feel the aura of this sword. If Gohan did not remember all the sword ladies of the ancient and treasure sword grades, then Gohan definitely remembered and understood all the sword ladies of the famed sword grades. There were 403 famed sword maidens in total, and Gohan had memorized all of them in a week. However, in Gohan's memory, this completely black sword had never appeared before. In other words, this was a new famed sword maiden that had not been recorded by humans. This was a huge discovery that could be called big news. It was not like the first few hundred years after the apocalypse. At that time, new sword maidens would be discovered every year. However, now that it had been more than 1,000 years, even the ancient sword maidens, which had the most numbers, rarely had new members. Generally speaking, it was possible to find a brand new sword maiden every few years for ancient sword maidens, and it was possible to find new sword maidens every few decades for treasured swords. However, for famed swords, the last famed sword maiden had been around 50 years ago. Unfortunately, if this was the only famed sword maiden that had been found, it would be normal for the 8 bases to broadcast the news for 3 days and 3 nights. However, this time, there was a brand new Emperor Sword level sword lady that had been discovered. This famous sword level sword lady had become a bonus, an appetizer. Because this was a newly discovered sword lady, there was naturally no information about her in the human database. Gohan had no way of knowing how strong this sword lady was, so he could only use his skin to sense it. This was similar to a human's sixth sense. There was nothing scientific about it, but there were always miraculous stories about it. This is indeed a famed sword maiden, and I can feel the great power contained within it. Moreover, the material used is very special. It seems to be a wooden sword made from a type of wood. Gohan put down the famed sword maiden in his hand and made this judgment. Wooden swords were a very special existence among sword maidens. Among all sword maidens, about 1/30th of them were wooden swords. After all, there were many famous wooden swords in the history of the world. Moreover, Most people would use wooden swords when they first started swordsmanship. However, because of the material used to make wooden swords, they were not very powerful after they became sword maidens. They were considered to be at the bottom of the list. Among the ancient sword maidens and treasure sword maidens, 3 out of 10 were wooden swords. Therefore, Gahan was very surprised. The famed sword maiden in his hand had a power that even King Gojin's sword could not compare to. This was a power that could be ranked in the top 10 of the famed sword maidens. This kind of power actually came from a wooden sword. It was too miraculous. My husband's eyes are as bright as a torch. If Qing Er remembers correctly, this sword will fight with the 3-foot goddess for the #1 spot in the famed sword tier in the future. I Ching chuckled. This sword can actually fight with the 3-foot sword for the #1 spot. Gohan once again sized up the sword maiden in his hand in disbelief. Although Gahan had already guessed that this sword could fight for a spot in the top 10 of the famed sword tier, he never imagined that it could actually fight with the 3-foot sword for the #1 spot. If the first and second place in the treasure sword tier, the heavenly sword and the fish intestine, were separated by less than 5%, then the first and second place in the famed sword tier were separated by 100%. That's right, the difference in strength between the first and second place in the famed sword tier was just that terrifying. The first place sword maiden was able to crush the second place by a whole fold. That's right, I Ching blinked. My husband will know the specifics in the future. Qing Er won't explain it to my husband. I'll leave you with some suspense. Then what's this sword called? You can at least tell me. Gahan took a step back and asked for the next best thing. That's not a problem. Actually, my husband, you already know her. Her name is Juzi Sword. I Ching said with a smile. Juzi Sword, it's actually her. Guhan came to a sudden realization. No wonder I Ching said that he knew about her long ago. In Sword Maiden Online, Guhan had already collected a total of 9 Juzi sword mechanical birds and placed them in his pocket. No, since the game already had a keepsake of Juzi Sword, didn't that mean that humans already knew about Juzi Sword? How could it be a new and undiscovered sword maiden? But on second thought, Gahan immediately reacted. Since Jitian Jindi was able to leave a foreshadowing of the heroes begin at the end instance dungeon, then leaving a keepsake of Juzi Sword didn't seem to be a big deal. After all, Juzi Sword was hidden here by Jitian Jindi. Jitian Jindi must have a deep understanding of Juzi Sword. My husband, please hide this Juzi Sword well. This is a famed sword maiden that Qing Er specially prepared for you. Qing Er knows that it's impossible for you to obtain the 3-foot sword, so she prepared Juzi Sword here for you. She's still a child who has never had a master before. Please treat her well, my husband. I Ching specially reminded him. This is the famed sword maiden that you prepared for me. When Gahan heard I Ching's words, he was stunned. Then, he put down Juzi's sword and shook his head helplessly. Although Juzi's sword might be comparable to the 3-foot sword as you said, I've already promised someone that my famed sword maiden will only be her, and no other sword maiden. Gahan couldn't help but think of Queen Yu, who was still in the game. He had been separated from her for about 20 days. He didn't know if she would go crazy thinking about him. She was the only one in the huge house. Qing Pin and Yi Tian had already returned to reality. She lived there alone and had no friends to talk to. She must be very lonely. Gohan promised Queen Yu that once he became a famed sword maiden in reality, he would immediately go to Yanjing City to coordinate with her. Gohan definitely wouldn't go back on his word. Husband, the person you're talking about is Queen Yu. I Ching directly saw through Guhan's thoughts. Husband, don't worry. Qing won't do anything to let the Queen of Yu down. After all, the Queen of Yu saved Qing Er's life. Qing has never forgotten the Queen of Yu's kindness. However, the King of Yu doesn't affect you having Lady Juzi. Don't tell me that you don't have Lady Yu Chong and Lady Yi Tian at the same time. That was only possible because of the Sword Maiden grafting spell. However, I've already used the Sword Maiden grafting spell on Doyu. This sorcery can only be used once. Gohan explained. Wrong, husband. Qing knows a thing or two about the Sword Maiden grafting technique. The reason why this technique can only be used once is because this Sword Maiden can't leave a mark on husband's body, so it can only be used once. But now, Lady Yuchong has left her sword mark in your purple palace. In fact, it's no different from a normal sword maiden. You can still use the sword maiden grafting technique again. Hearing I Ching's words, Gohan's heart was suddenly filled with anger. He glared at I Ching angrily. If you want me to use the sword maiden grafting technique again to steal someone else's sword maiden, I advise you to give up on that idea. I, Gohan, can give up many things for the sake of revenge and to defeat Yuan Ko. However, I will never give up on the most basic principles of being a human. Humans must not kill each other, and even more so, we must not use such heinous methods to increase our own strength. Don't be angry, husband. Please let Ching finish. I Ching pressed down on Gohan's shoulder and leaned her head against Gohan's chest. Ching unnaturally understands husband's thoughts. If husband was that kind of heartless scoundrel, Ching wouldn't like husband. But husband, there are some things that can't be changed by our will. In the future, you must use the sword maiden grafting technique. No, I won't use it. Gohan firmly shook his head and moved I Ching's head away from his chest. Is there only the Juzi sword? If there's nothing else, I'm leaving. Forget it. Husband won't listen to anything Ching says. When the day comes that day, I hope husband will make the right choice and not let Her Highness live in regret. I Ching's words confused Gohan. Just who was she and what did she mean? Husband, don't worry. Ching has prepared many things for husband. Husband, please take a look. I Ching clapped her hands and another toy car drove out from the open room. Chapter 424. Gohan watched as a new toy truck drove in front of him. The truck didn't have many things inside, only a pocket in the back of the truck. This is a dimensional pocket. Gohan's heart skipped a beat when he saw the pocket. This pocket was very similar to the dimensional pocket that Gohan had obtained, which contained the yin-yang swordsmanship technique. It should have been made from the same template. Yes, husband. Open it and see what's in this dimensional pocket. I Ching took the dimensional pocket from the back of the truck and handed it to Gohan. Gohan's mind entered the pocket and found that it was filled with all kinds of sword mark imprints needed for deep sword scars. From the most basic ones used to deepen the sword scars to the 9th grade sword scar dust, the 8th grade sword scar crystal, the 7th grade sword scar fragment, the 6th grade sword scar crystal, the 5th grade sword scar raw stone, the 4th grade sword scar gem, the 3rd grade sword scar diamond, the 2nd grade sword scar immortal stone, and the 1st grade sword scar divine stone. They were all included in it. The materials needed for deep sword scars were collectively known as sword mark imprints. Gohan counted the number of sword mark imprints and found that there were only 20 of each type. 20 sword scar dust was nothing. 1 sword scar dust was only sold for 1 hero coin and could be bought in the quest store. 1 sword scar crystal was not expensive either. It was only 5 hero coins per sword scar crystal. However, the price of the sword mark fragments and the sword mark crystals would start to double from the original price of 5. Sword scar fragments cost 25 hero coins, sword scar crystals cost 125 hero coins, and so on. In the end, the price of the sword scar divine stone, which could activate the sword lady's ultimate skill, had risen to 390,000 hero coins. Moreover, there was no market for it. It was difficult to find a sword scar divine stone for more than 10 days. Whenever a sword scar divine stone was put up for sale, the surrounding sword wielders would immediately buy it. P.S. The author has spent a lot of time figuring out the price system of the sword scar imprint. Previously, it was mentioned that the 200 sword scar crystals that Ku Rakin used to exchange for information about Gohan are worth 20,000 hero coins. Now that I've corrected it, the real value should be 1,000 hero coins. If 200 of the second-to-last sword scar crystals cost 20,000 hero coins, then a normal ancient sword wielder would never be able to raise their sword maiden to tier 3. That's why I've decided to change the pricing system, so that an ordinary ancient sword wielder can raise their ancient sword wielder to around tier 3 after spending their entire lives working hard. Gohan did some calculations. If all the sword marks in the dimensional pocket were to be converted into hero coins, it would be worth more than 9 million hero coins. A treasure sword tier swordsman would not be able to accumulate so many hero coins in their lifetime. Converting it to the modern concept, it was equivalent to someone giving you a gift worth 100 million. This was definitely a gift from a super nouveau riche. 20 of each type of sword scar imprint is just enough for husband to raise Qing Pin, Heavenly Reliance, and Fishbowl to tier 1. Husband, you must be careful when you use them. Don't lose too many. Qing Air doesn't have any more, Qing said slowly. Gohan shook his head. You're wrong. Heavenly Reliance and Fishbowl need 5 sword scar imprints each time, while Qing Pin only needs 1. Altogether, 11 of each type is enough for me to raise them to tier 1. Why would I need 20? Gohan suddenly stopped speaking. He suddenly remembered what had happened when he gave Qing Pin a sword scar imprint in Yuzhong University. When Qing Pin had raised his sword scar powder to tier 9, he had used up a total of 10 sword scar powder. This was 10 times more than a normal ancient sword maiden. Although he did not leave a deep sword mark on the poor man from then on, Gohan was 80 to 90% sure that if he continued to leave a deep mark on this little ancestor in the future, it would probably be the same as when he left a 9th grade mark on the poor man. He would need to use 10 sword marks. The Heavenly Sword and Fishbowl Sword, which were treasured swords, only required 5 of them. The poor sword, on the other hand, had already reached the level of a sword maiden, which was a famed sword. In other words, if he wanted to raise all 3 of Gohan's sword maidens to tier 1, he would not need the normal 11 sword scar powder. 20 sword scar powder was exactly the amount that I Ching had given him. I Ching's calculation was right. Instead, he had forgotten about the uniqueness of being poor. It seemed that I Ching had a very deep understanding of him. He actually knew such a secret as being poor. It seemed that in the future, he would really trust I Ching to the extreme. Perhaps this was the trust between husband and wife. Seeing Gohan silently transfer the sword scar powder from his dimensional pocket to his old dimensional pocket, I Ching worriedly added, Husband, you must complete the sword scar powder within 3 days. If you don't complete it within 3 days, I'm afraid that you won't be able to handle the upcoming battle. Battle? Where am I going to fight? Gohan was stunned. After leaving here, he should have followed the Eagle Cat Sword Spirit back to Yuzhong City and then prepare for the 8th Academy Tournament that would begin in 10 days. Even if the 8th Academy Tournament was indeed going to be a battle, that would only happen in 10 days. Why did I Ching say that there would be a battle that he would not be able to handle in 3 days? Thinking of this, Gohan suddenly remembered the news of the fall of Yayang Fortress. Could it be that Yuan Ko did not stop while he was ahead and intended to further threaten Yuzhong City? A sense of urgency surged in Gohan's heart. He had to leave the trial array as soon as possible and return to Yuzhong City to protect his city. Don't worry, husband. As the saying goes, the boat will cross the bridge when it reaches the end. Even if you leave now, you won't be able to make it in time. Qing Air still has some important things to give you, I Ching said as the second door opened. However, this time, there was no toy truck. Instead, I Ching walked into the room and soon came out with 2 brocade boxes. Husband, do you still remember this thing? I Ching first opened the smallest brocade box. There was nothing else in this brocade box. Only a small golden sugar pill was placed in the center of the brocade box. It's actually this. When Gohan saw this little sugar pill, his entire body began to tremble. Of course, Gohan recognized this thing. It was this thing that allowed Gohan to experience what it felt like to be a sword wielder at the level of a fairy sword. In the Wu-Tang Peak instance of Sword Maiden Online, Gohan, who was burnt to a crisp by Xayonada, received this pill from the Wu-Tang sect leader. That pill instantly healed all of his injuries and temporarily gave him 1,000,000 quarks of sword essence, allowing him to experience what it felt like to be a sword wielder at the level of a fairy sword. In the battle with Xayonada, he seemed to have damaged his brain nerves in the end. He needed to go to the medical center to get a health certificate before he could enter the game again. It was because of this health certificate that Gohan met Song Yifei for the second time. Gohan remembered that this pill had an awesome name. It was called 6 Transformations Immortal Pill. According to the Wu-Tang sect leader, this was an immortal pill given to Zhang Sanfeng by Taishang Laojun. After eating it, one could become an immortal. Previously, the sword wielder of the Wu-Tang sword faction, who was almost 200 years old, had become an immortal sword wielder after eating a 6 transformations immortal pill. After coming out of the instance dungeon, Gahan had desperately searched for information about the 6 transformations immortal pill. However, Gahan had searched for all the information he could find. Other than a lot of online novels, Gahan could not find any information about the 6 transformations immortal pill. Guhan changed his way of thinking and tried to find any information about the survivors of Wu-Tang Mountain, but to no avail. After all, 800 years had passed. At that time, the human information system had not been established yet, so it was reasonable that he could not find any information about those people. Originally, Gahan had forgotten about the 6 transformations immortal pill. He thought that it was just a dream in the instance dungeon. It was impossible for him to encounter such an immortal pill in the real world. However, this immortal pill had appeared in I Ching's hand and was placed in front of Gahan. This is for me. Even with Guhan's mental fortitude, he could not help but feel his throat go dry. As long as he consumed that pill, he would be able to become an immortal sword wielder. There is probably no one in this world who could resist such a temptation. Of course, it's for you, husband. I Ching placed the box in Guhan's hands. Back then, I Ching finally managed to find the descendants of Wudong sect, who had concealed their identities. I tried to reason with them, and finally managed to obtain a 6 revolutions immortal pill from them. All of this was for the sake of giving it to my beloved husband one day. You obtained this from the descendants of the Wu-Tang sect. Guhan held the 6 transformations immortal pill tightly in his hand. He suppressed his desire to swallow it immediately. Are the descendants of the Wu-Tang sect still alive? I don't know how they are now. However, when I found them, they were living rather pathetically. They were always hiding in Yinjing City because they were afraid that their identities would be discovered by those who coveted the 6 transformations immortal pill. I don't know if they are still in Yinjing City. Perhaps they have moved to Yuzhong City. Perhaps they are all dead. I Ching did not care about the descendants of the Wu-Tang sect, but Guhan remembered it deeply. Qing'er, do you still remember where those people live? Guhan asked. Of course I remember, but they should have moved away long ago. Why? Do you still want to look for them? I Ching smiled. As she spoke, she gave him an address. Of course, Gahan wanted to find them. If the descendants of the Wu-Tang sect were still alive, then the remaining 6 transformations immortal pill should be in their hands. Such a divine item should not be buried in the hands of a group of mortals. The difficult sword era was coming soon. If humans could use these 6 transformations immortal sword wielder to create a few immortal sword wielder, then the lives of humans would be much better. Guhan silently compared the address on his personal terminal. He was surprised to find that although the address and the house number had long disappeared, the name of the road was still marked on the map. Perhaps he could find some clues. Chapter 425. Whether or not you want to find them is your own business. Ching won't blame you for anything. I just hope that you won't force them because they are all alone. They're just a bunch of pitiful people. I Ching said after telling Guhan the news of the Wu-Dang sect survivors. Guhan nodded and said, that's right. To the descendants of the Wudong sect survivors, the 6 revolutions elixir was more precious than their lives. Even if Gahan could find them after 700 years, they probably wouldn't hand the 6 revolutions elixir to Gahan. If Gahan insisted on getting it, Gahan would have to use some forceful methods. Don't worry, I won't use any underhanded methods. Gahan shook his head. I will exchange with them, be it wealth, strength, or safety. They will always have something they want to exchange. I understand now. My husband is actually a kind and amiable person. I Ching leaned into Gahan's arms. By the way, hubby, you can't take this 6 revolutions elixir before you become an in-name disciple of the Ren School. Disciple of the Ren School? Gahan remembered this term. After he took the 6 revolutions elixir in the dungeon, he obtained the title of an in-name disciple of the Ren School. However, wasn't this title automatically obtained after taking the elixir? Why do you have to obtain this title before he could take this thing? As if she could see the doubt in Gahan's heart, I Ching continued to explain, the 6 Revolutions elixir can only be taken by the disciples of the Ren school. If you take the 6 Revolutions elixir before becoming a disciple of the Ren school, there's a 99% chance that your body will explode and you will die. Of course, if you're lucky enough to encounter the 1% success rate, you can also obtain the title of an in-name disciple of the Ren school, just like Hubby in the game. There is such a restriction. Gohan also remembered that the 6 Revolutions elixir in the game's attribute panel seemed to have such a description. Item, 6 Revolutions elixir grade. Divine item, legendary. Effect. There's a 1% chance that you will gain 1 million sword essence points after taking it. There's a 99% chance that you will die immediately after taking it. Once they consumed it, they would immediately join Ren school and become an in-name disciple of Ren school. Introduction. An immortal pill refined by the Grand Supreme Elder. Those who are not disciples of Ren school cannot consume it. Then this immortal pill is pretty useless. Gohan's desire for the 6 Revolutions immortal pill plummeted when he heard these conditions. Reality wasn't a game. In the game, Gohan could bet on the 1% chance of success. At most, he wouldn't be able to enter the game for 3 days. However, in reality, Gohan was burdened with too many things. He would never bet on a 99% chance of failure. Not necessarily. As long as you can find the Heavenly Master of the Ren School and let him accept you as a disciple, you will be promoted from an in-name disciple of the Ren School to a disciple of the Ren School. Then, you will be able to safely consume this 6 Revolutions elixir, I Ching said with a smile. The Heavenly Master of Ren School? There is no celestial master in this world. Is he Yuan Ko or a human? Gohan heard I Ching's words and regained some hope in the pill. 700 years have passed. How would I know where the Heavenly Master of Ren School is? However, haven't you been looking for the Green Lotus Sword Immortal? As long as you find the Green Lotus Sword Immortal, you will be able to find the Heavenly Master of Ren School, I Ching said with a smile. The Green Lotus Sword Immortal again. Gohan didn't know how many times he had heard of the Green Lotus Sword Immortal's name. Not only did he need to find him for Artoria's whereabouts, but he also needed to find him for his 3 Green Lotus Swords. Now, even the 6 Revolutions elixir was in his hands. Who was this Green Lotus Sword Immortal? Why did Gohan feel that everything was related to him? All right, I'll keep this pill. We'll talk about it after I find the Green Lotus Sword Immortal. Before he found the Green Lotus Sword Immortal, this 6 Revolutions elixir was useless. Of course, if Gohan faced some kind of desperate situation where he would definitely die, like when he faced the invincible Gunida in the Instance Dungeon, he could bet on the 1% chance of eating this 6 Revolutions elixir and fight for that slim chance of survival. However, Gohan would rather never face such a situation where he would have to gamble with his life. There's also this. I Ching took out a total of 2 boxes from the room. The first box contained the 6 Revolutions elixir. When he opened the second box, there was a strange grayish-black metal strip. What's this? When Gohan saw this metal strip, he searched his memory and found that there was nothing that could match it. This is the key to your house. Give it to Ching for safekeeping. When Ching sees you again, she will return the key to you. I Ching said with a serious expression. This is the key to my house. Gohan subconsciously searched for the door key in his dimensional pocket. No, his house key was still in his dimensional pocket. He hadn't lost it. Moreover, looking at the appearance of the key in I Ching's hand, it looked like a simple metal strip. It didn't even have the teeth marks that a key should have. How could it open the door lock? Let me see. Although he still had his doubts, since these words came from I Ching's mouth, Gohan naturally believed 50% of it. Thus, Gohan picked up the key from the box and put it in his hand to check it carefully. No, you can't take this key. If you want to see it, let Ching help you. I Ching hurriedly stopped Gohan and carefully took the key out of the box. Although it was only a small piece smaller than a finger, I Ching seemed to use all her strength to pick it up. She was so tired that golden syrup flowed down her forehead. Is this key very heavy? Seeing I Ching's difficult appearance, Gohan subconsciously asked, "Of course it's heavy. This key weighs 108,000 kilograms." I Ching's words were a weight that could frighten people to death. What kind of joke was this? This key was 108,000 Jin? Sun Wukong's Jingu Bang was only 13,500 Jin. This small key was equivalent to the weight of 8 Rui Jingu Bang. 108,000 Jin was equivalent to 54 tons. What did 54 tons mean? It was about the weight of a Type 99 main battle tank. It seemed that it was cute to turn into a girl. Ahem, I'm off topic. Anyway, Gohan didn't believe that this small key was as heavy as a Type 99 main battle tank. If it really was that heavy, then how dense was this key? It was about 10 tons per cubic centimeter. Then what did 10 tons per cubic centimeter mean? To put it simply, if you put this key in your hand and then gently threw it on the ground, then this key would sink about a meter deep into the ground under the influence of gravity. It was impossible to find an object with such a high density on Earth, even in a laboratory. The laboratory could only compress an object with such a density at the molecular level, which is a volume that could not be seen with the naked eye. Anything larger than that would be impossible to be achieved by human technology. If there was anything in the universe that could reach such a density, then it would be a white dwarf. If you didn't know what a white dwarf was, you could search it on Baidu. It was a very interesting thing. Husband, Chinger isn't joking. Before you reach the peak of the famed sword level, don't try to pick this thing up. The strongest greatsword, the sword Maiden, had a maximum weight of 10 tons. After reaching the famed sword level, this upper limit could be increased to 100 tons. However, that was for a greatsword like the cast cloud iron. For a light sword like the heavenly sword, it could only lift up to 50 tons. Even though Gohan's physical fitness could reach the standard of a famed sword level with the support of the yin-yang sword technique, it was only above average. There was still a long way to go before he could reach the peak of the famed sword level. If what I Ching said was right, if Gohan tried to pick up this key before he reached the peak of the famed sword level, a large hole would probably be pierced through his palm. But from another perspective, although it was very difficult to lift it, I Ching was still able to hold such a heavy object firmly in her hand. Didn't that mean that I Ching was equivalent to a famed sword-level sword wielder? At this moment, Iho's forehead kept dripping with golden syrup as she lifted the key. She tried to lift the key higher so that Gohan could see it clearly. Gohan carefully looked at the key. There was nothing special about it. Just like the Juzi sword, it was rather simple and unadorned. However, Gohan noticed that the word Gu was engraved on the small side of the key. It seemed like this really was the key to Gohan's house. Put away. I won't touch this key. Gohan gestured for I Ching to put the key back. I Ching immediately let out a sigh of relief and put the key back into the box. Strangely, when the key was put back into the box, I Ching's entire body became relaxed, as if the weight of the key no longer existed, although the box containing the key was still in I Ching's hands. Husband, you must know that this key must not leave this box. This box has a floating formation that can offset the weight of the key. As long as this key is placed in the box, it can be carried around at any time. Otherwise, even a dimensional pocket will not be able to withstand such a large density and the space will crack. I Ching placed the box in Gohan's hands. The feel of this box in his hands was no different from that of a normal box. Gohan opened the box and looked at the key. Then he stretched out a finger and tried to push the edge of the key. Although Gohan could not focus all his strength on his finger, with Gohan's current physical fitness, Gohan's finger could still push a weight of 1 or 2 tons. However, this key did not move at all. It was like a house with a sturdy foundation. At this moment, Gohan finally believed that this small key could indeed weigh tens of tons. Chapter 426. Ching, tell me, where is this key? Anyway, it's definitely not the key to my house. According to I Ching, this key seemed to be the key to Gohan's house. However, Gohan could clearly tell everyone that this was not the key to his house at all. The weight of his house was not even a fraction of the weight of this key. If the key was inserted, the entire door would probably collapse and smash a huge hole through the entire building. Of course, this is the key to my husband's house. However, it's not the key to my current house. It's the key to my ancestral land. I Ching said mysteriously. The words ancestral land deeply stimulated Gahan. Could it be that the ancestral land that I Ching mentioned was the mysterious ancestral land of his family that had all traces of its existence erased? Where? Gahan took a deep breath. Where's the door to this key? Where's my ancestral land? You asked Ching this question, but Ching doesn't know how to answer. I Ching tilted her head. You've been with Ching for so long, but you've never mentioned anything about your family. You only gave this key to Ching when you were about to separate and asked her to leave it to you. Therefore, Ching doesn't know where your ancestral land is. Did I give you this key? And I didn't tell you about my family? Gahan hesitated for a moment. Then he closed the box and put the key into his dimensional pocket. Since he didn't tell I Ching about his family after returning to the past, it meant that he had to hide it for some reason. He didn't want to tell his current self about it. This also proved how deep the waters of his family were. Perhaps even sword spirits and sword immortals wouldn't be able to understand the story behind it. Don't worry, hubby. Since you asked Ching to give this key to you, it means that you'll need this key sooner or later. When that time comes, everything will come to light. I Ching comforted Gahan. I understand. Gahan nodded his head and looked at I Ching expectantly. From the Juzi sword at the start to the sword scar imprint to the 6 revolutions immortal pill, the clan key, Gahan had obtained many things from I Ching that he could never have imagined. He wondered if I Ching had anything else that he had yet to give to him. And this. Sure enough, I Ching had something to give to Gahan again. But this time, the place where I Ching hid the thing surprised Gahan. I Ching had actually put her hand in her skirt, and then one of her hands was constantly twitching and rubbing between the valley of her crotch, as if she was touching herself in an action movie from a certain island country before the cataclysm. As I Ching kept touching herself, her expression kept changing. At first, she could still maintain her composure, but later, she gradually fell into a daze. Drops of golden syrup seeped out of her forehead. In the end, she couldn't control her mouth anymore and started to let out soft moans. This was very awkward. Gahan didn't know how to deal with I Ching's actions. Should he stop her or not? Faced with this scene, Gahan had completely lost the ability to judge. In the end, he could only let I Ching torment his body. After a while, after a long period of panting and spasms, I Ching's body finally calmed down. She slowly withdrew her hand from her skirt, but this time, there was a transparent green gem in her hand. Husband, this is Ching Er's last gift to you. I Ching handed the gem to Gahan and said word by word. Husband, please keep this green onion stone. This is the key to control the whole trial formation. With this stone, husband can control the whole trial formation. Everything in the trial formation will be used by husband. Seeing this green onion stone, Gahan hesitated for a while, but he still took it from I Ching's hand. He didn't know where this stone was taken from, but the surface of the stone was covered with a layer of sticky honey. It was really honey. Gahan couldn't help but sniff it. It was indeed a pure smell of honey. It wasn't a descriptive word from a pornographic novel. Why did you hide it in there? Although Gahan really wanted to ask this question, after a long time, he finally asked this question. How do I use this green onion stone? How do I use it to control the whole trial formation? Husband, please put the green onion stone on the green stone ring. The green stone ring will tell husband about the rest. I Ching seemed to be a little weak, and her voice started to become weak. She seemed to be unable to stand. Her legs went soft, and she fell on Gahan's body. Gahan caught her and held her in his arms. Ching, are you okay? Gahan ignored Ching Chong Shi and looked at I Ching with concern. Her body seemed to be in a terrible state. It's okay, husband. Ching is just a little tired. Husband quickly used the green onion stone. Ching will be fine after a short rest. Under I Ching's repeated persuasion, Gahan placed the green onion stone ring on his finger. Once the green onion stone ring came into contact with the green stone ring, it immediately absorbed the green onion stone ring. The green onion stone ring seemed to become soft mud, and it slowly absorbed the green onion stone ring. Finally, it completely enveloped the green onion stone ring. At this moment, it was like a lightning strike in Guhan's mind. Countless information surged into Guhan's memory. These were the ways to use the green onion stone. It turned out that if humans wanted to use the green onion stone to control the trial formation, they had to have the cooperation of the green stone ring. These two were indispensable. This was also to prevent outsiders from taking control of the trial formation due to some special reasons. With the cooperation of the green stone ring and the green onion stone, Guhan could control the operation of the entire trial formation. He could change the attributes of each room, the route of advancement on the map, the strength of Yuan Ko, whether it was a prop room or an event room. Guhan could even move people in the trial formation from one place to another. In short, in the trial formation, Guhan was like a god. Even if it was an immortal sword wielder, they would not be able to gain any advantage from Guhan in the trial formation. The benefits of this trial formation were not just this. In addition to being able to act like a tyrant within the range of the trial formation, Guhan could also control the memory fragments of Jindi in the trial formation. He could bring these Yuan Ko to the outside world to fight for him. There were a total of 240 Yuan Ko memory fragments in the trial formation. From the lowest mouse level Yuan Ko to the powerful spirit sword wielder, Yuan Ko, who was equivalent to an ordinary spirit sword wielder, Guhan could summon them from the trial formation to Guhan's position at any time to fight for Guhan. To be able to summon a spirit sword wielder to fight for them, most of the Jindi families only had this strength. Other than the top few Jindi families that had a mortal sword wielder, the rest of the Jindi families had the highest battle power of a spirit sword wielder. After obtaining the control of the trial formation, Guhan was equivalent to having a powerful strength that was not weaker than the Jindi family. In fact, his battle power was even slightly stronger than the Jindi family. This was because the Jindi family's sword wielder needed to look after too many places, so it was impossible for them to all gather around the patriarch. However, Guhan only needed a thought, and more than 200 Yuan Ko could appear around Guhan at the same time. Who was superior and who was inferior, it was clear at a glance. However, this ability had a huge drawback, and that was if the memory fragments left the protection of the trial formation and entered the outside world, then they would inevitably be eroded by the external energy. With the protection of the trial formation, these memory fragments could exist for 700 years without disappearing. However, once they lost the trial formation, they could only exist for half an hour at most. After half an hour, no matter what level the memory fragments of Yuan Ko were, they would all dissipate in the air and return to the most basic particle form. Even if they were only brought back to the trial formation for a short second in the outside world, it would not be able to prevent the dissipation of the memory fragments. This was something that could not be reversed once it was triggered. Therefore, if Guhan wanted to use the Yuan Ko in the trial formation, he had to be very cautious. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he could not summon these Yuan Ko. Otherwise, the trial formation that had lost the memory fragments would be meaningless. Although the memory fragments of Yuan Ko and the trial formation were consumables that could not be recovered once used, there were still 3 Yuan Ko that could be used repeatedly. They were the 3 Egyptian gods that Jatian Jindi had left in the trial formation: Batet, Anubis, and Isis. On the surface, Jatian Jindi had told these 3 unlucky guys that as long as they stayed here until Guhan arrived, he would give them freedom. However, in reality, Jatian Jindi had secretly left a secret hand on them. Their godheads were firmly controlled by the trial formation. As long as Guhan thought about it, these 3 unlucky guys' godheads would explode. Moreover, they would explode completely and irreparably. Without their godheads, they would return to being weak chickens in the dungeon. They couldn't even beat Guhan, who hadn't learned the yin-yang sword tactic, let alone Guhan, whose strength was equivalent to a treasure sword wielder. Therefore, as long as their godheads were in Guhan's hands, they would be forced to obey Gahan's orders. This was the most useful inheritance that Jatian Jindi had left for Gahan. These were 3 Yuan Ko that could reach the universe level after their strength was completely released. With these 3 Yuan Ko by Gahan's side, other than those flood level and desolate level Yuan Ko that Gahan did not dare to provoke, there was no Yuan Ko that Gahan could not deal with. Unfortunately, these 3 Yuan Ko's strength were not even at the meteor level, let alone the universe level. They were only equivalent to the soul level of a top treasure sword wielder. Chapter 427. The matter of the 3 Egyptian deities was complicated, and it was not something that could be controlled by simply threatening them with divinity. Gahan put this matter aside for the time being. He planned to find the 3 Egyptian deities to solve this problem after leaving the fairy tale land. The Shalat Stone's ability to control Yuan Ko was an ability that Gahan was very interested in. Apart from that, the Shalat Stone had another ability that could increase Gahan's life safety factor by 99%. According to the information, the Shalat Stone had the ultimate ability to break through the void and bring the wielder back to the trial formation. This was equivalent to the Hearthstone in World of Warcraft and the Return City in League of Legends. Of course, compared to these 2 abilities, there was still a certain difference. The Hearthstone and the Return City both required a lot of channeling time, but the Shalat Stone's ability was instantaneous. As long as Gahan willed it, the void door could leave and open, and Gahan could return to the trial formation in an instant. One could imagine how precious this ability was. As long as the Shalat Stone was there, unless it was an attack that could kill Gahan instantly without giving him any time to react, Gahan could use the Shalat Stone's power to return to the trial formation. If Gahan had this ability when he faced Medusa, then Gahan would not have faced that life-or-death crisis and almost lost his life. Of course, a powerful ability came with a powerful price. Once this ability was used, the Shalat Stone would lose all its energy and fall into a deep sleep, and Gahan would also lose control of the trial formation. As for how long it would take for the Shalat Stone to recover its energy, it was unknown. The information did not mention this at all. However, with the powerful energy needed to break through the void, it would take the Shalat Stone 10 or 20 years to accumulate enough energy naturally. In fact, Gahan now had a set of double insurance. When Gahan encountered a fatal danger, Gahan's master, Lule, could also use the giant void hand to grab Gahan back. Only when Lule could not make a move would the Shalat Stone be used. Anyway, Gahan's life-saving ability had improved greatly. Unless it was a flood level or desolation level Yuan Ko, there was no Yuan Ko that could instantly kill Gahan. After reading all the information, Gahan slowly opened his eyes. He subconsciously touched the sapphire ring on his hand. He looked at it and found that the Shalat Stone had automatically embedded itself into the sapphire ring. Without a doubt, this sapphire ring was the most precious thing he had besides the Sword Lady. It was a treasure that Gahan could not lose. "Thank you, Qing'er. What you did for me is really..." Gahan turned his head and wanted to thank I Ching, but he found that I Ching's whole body was like a roasted chocolate, softly lying on his body. Her eyes were tightly closed, and her mouth was weakly open. She felt like a fish out of water. "Qing'er, what's wrong?" Gahan hurriedly wanted to carry I Ching in his arms to check on her condition. However, when he carried her, he found that I Ching's body was much lighter than before. How can this be? Gahan's heart skipped a beat. He looked below I Ching's body. I Ching's long legs had disappeared, and her skirt was floating in the air. It was as if I Ching's legs didn't exist before. Gahan immediately touched I Ching's lower abdomen and found that I Ching's pelvis had completely disappeared. At this moment, I Ching was like a paraplegic patient. How can this be? How can this be? For the first time, Gahan began to panic. He began to panic because of a woman. He put I Ching on the sofa and found that the ground where I Ching was standing just now was covered with a black, sticky liquid. Could it be? A terrifying thought flashed through Gahan's mind. He immediately lifted I Ching's skirt, disregarding the difference between a man and a woman. Then, he weakly took a few steps back and almost fell to the ground. Gahan saw that only half of I Ching's but was still on her body. The remaining half of her but was constantly dripping the black liquid that Guhan saw just now. The speed of this liquid was not slow. In about 10 seconds, I Ching's but had shrunk by a third at a speed visible to the naked eye. After seeing this, if Gahan still didn't understand what had happened, then Gahan would be a complete fool. I Ching's body was like a block of ice, constantly melting, starting from her legs to her butt, and finally her whole body would melt and turn into a pool of black liquid. Just like I Ching had said before, in a few hours, the world would become a pool of stinky water. Gahan looked at the clock. At this time, it had only been more than 30 minutes since Gahan entered the candy house. There was clearly more than 20 minutes left. Why did I Ching melt? Why? Husband, are you by Ching Er's side? Husband? At this time, I Ching woke up from her coma again. She raised her hand weakly, as if she was looking for something. Gahan immediately returned to I Ching's side, held her raised hand, and hugged her whole body in his arms. He didn't care that the black liquid that melted from her body would stain his snow-white clothes. I'm here. Gahan finally understood why in all the TV dramas, when the male and female leads were about to be separated by life and death, it was always the male lead who held the female lead, held her hand, and gazed at her affectionately. Because at this moment, apart from these things, Gahan couldn't do anything else, just like how he faced the death of his parents 12 years ago. I'm so happy. Husband actually cried for Ching. At this time, seeing Gahan's sparkling silver eyes, I Ching suddenly laughed happily. Husband always looked serious, just like Ching Er's Prince Charming. Ching Er thought that husband wouldn't be sad for a body made of candy when Ching Er was about to leave. I didn't expect to see husband's tears at this time. Ching Er's more than 700 years of waiting is worth it. Ching Er. Gahan didn't know what to say at all. Even if he was extraordinarily resourceful, at this time, it was still a mess. Husband, don't blame me. This is Ching Er's destiny. When this body was made, when Ching Er's memory was poured into it, Ching Er knew that everything was destined. To be able to spend half an hour with husband, Ching Er's life is enough for Ching Er. I Ching's entire body was enveloped in a glow of happiness and satisfaction. Even though she had been created to wait, and this wait had lasted for 700 years, even though these 700 years were only for a short half an hour of reunion, I Ching was still so satisfied, a satisfaction that came from the bottom of her heart. How could Gahan not be deeply touched by this scene? In this life, there was such a girl who waited for you to this extent. What regret could there be in this life? What misfortune could there be to say? Ching Er, you must have lost the green onion stone for this to happen. Gahan took the green stone ring off his finger. Gahan, who had just treated the green stone ring as a treasure, was now not stingy and wanted to return it to I Ching. But when Gahan put the green stone ring on I Ching's hand, he discovered that I Ching's hand also began to melt. At this time, I Ching's hand also began to melt, and Gahan's hand was full of the black liquid left behind by I Ching's melting. No, husband, the green onion stone is no longer of any use to Ching Er. I Ching struggled with the last of her strength and shook her head. Husband, Ching Er admits that the core of Ching Er's body is the green onion stone. But even if I didn't lose the green onion stone, Ching Er will inevitably melt after an hour. Whether the green onion stone is in Ching Er's body or not, it will be of no use. Husband, please take this ring back. Otherwise, Ching Er will not be at ease even if I leave. Ching Er, no. Gahan's voice was already a bit choked. His heart was hit hard by I Ching's words, and his whole heart was sour. Husband, Ching Er is not the real Ching Er. Ching Er is only a memory. And it's not Ching Er that disappeared, just this body of Ching Er. Ching Er will be like Ching Er in the game, entering the greenstone ring and watching husband slowly grow into an indomitable giant, the greatest genie majesty in the world. That way, Ching or will be able to reunite with husband in the other world. After saying this, I Ching closed his eyes heavily. Then, a beam of light shot out from I Ching's forehead and flew into the greenstone ring. This beam of light was probably I Ching's memory, and as it disappeared, I Ching's candy body completely lost its vitality. The remaining half of her body almost instantly turned into a puddle of black liquid and splashed on the sofa with a clatter. Ching, I Ching, je tian jindi. His Majesty Jetian. Guhan silently recited these names. From today onwards, I, Guhan, owe you my life. Don't worry, I'll definitely go to that world and meet you. After saying this in his heart, Guhan let out a long sigh and then took out a handkerchief from his dimensional pocket to wipe the tears from his eyes. But just as he wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes, another drop of black liquid dripped onto Guhan's face. Guhan looked up and found that the ceiling of the candy house seemed to be damp, and there were droplets of water that continuously dripped onto the ground. Oh no, I Ching is gone, and this candy house can't hold on much longer. I have to leave immediately. With this thought, Guhan decided to leave the candy house, and he gave the sofa one last nostalgic look. Guhan, who originally wanted to pay his respects to I Ching, suddenly found that there was an additional dazzling golden sword on the sofa. Chapter 428. I can feel it. Has it finally come into being? In two different places in this world, two dignified figures who looked like Buddha stopped what they were doing at the same time and stared at the direction of Changyang Mountain, as if there was some kind of rare treasure hidden there. Ahem, it's been more than 20 days. Have those little guys finally gained something? An old man with a wrinkled face said to himself, Jetian, Jetian, even though countless people suspect that you're hiding the Emperor's sword, I still don't believe it. I think someone as great as you wouldn't disregard the survival of the human race. I didn't expect that I was wrong. That sword has really been hidden by you. But why? Why did he hide such an important sword? He hid it for more than 700 years. At the same time, in London, thousands of miles away from Hao Ian Jindi, Longsher Jindi was laughing wildly. Ha! Ancestor guessed right. That sword has indeed been hidden by Jetian. Good, as expected of His Majesty Jindi, whom I Longsher admire the most. You really have the guts to hide that sword for more than 700 years. That's delightful and courageous, ha ha ha. After laughing for a long time, Longsher Jindi finally closed his mouth and then calmly sat back in front of his TV. Although you, Jetian Jindi, have hidden it deep enough, it is still in the bag of my city of London. With that little thing around, those little guys are going to suffer. With a rumble, the once colorful candy house finally turned into a pool of black water and no longer existed. Guhan sighed and then looked at the shining golden sword lady in his hand. Logically speaking, except for the shining golden Genesis splitter, Guhan had not seen any sword that shone as brightly as this one. It was unknown who came up with the awkward-sounding name of Genesis Earth Cleaver Star. Generally speaking, people called it the Cleaver Sword. It was a sword maiden at the immortal sword level. Legend had it that it was the sword of the hero King Gilgamesh. It was now stored in Berlin's sword tower. The sword lady should be the most dazzling sword lady among all the sword lady pictures that Guhan had seen. Even through the computer screen, Guhan could see the dazzling golden light. Every molecule that made up the sword lady seemed to want to make its own golden light shine, so it was said to be the most dazzling sword lady in the world. Guhan once thought so, but when he saw the sword lady in his hand, he decisively withdrew this idea. Although the sword in his hand did not have the aura of the sword of Paragon, the golden light was completely restrained, hiding the overwhelming aura of a king within his body. Only those who understood swords would be able to see that the golden light on his body was so outstanding, so powerless, that people could not help but want to kneel at the feet of this sword maiden. If the sword lady was said to be a well-dressed and elegant noble son, then the sword Guhan was talking about was probably a hidden dragon in the abyss. It was like Liu Bang the ancestor of the Han dynasty who molested innocent women in Pei County. The sword was golden in color, and its appearance was not special. It looked the same as most bronze swords from ancient times. But the two sides of the sword blade were extremely amazing, engraved with all kinds of patterns. The two sides of the sword's blade were engraved with different pictures. The author of these pictures was probably an abstract painter. Even with Gahan's imagination, he could not tell what the pictures were. They were even more Picasso than Picasso. Gahan could only judge based on his own feelings. One side of the sword was probably the sky, the sun, and the moon, while the other side was the mountains, rivers, and grass. This was the limit that Gahan could distinguish. Although there were no pictures on the sword's hilt, lines of extremely small hieroglyphs were written. These words were so small that even a magnifying glass would take up a lot of effort to read them. On the two sides of the sword's hilt, there were more than 1,000 words, and they were the hieroglyphs that took up the most space. From this, one could imagine how small the words engraved on the sword's hilt were. They were about the thickness of a strand of hair. Gahan did not know any hieroglyphs, so he did not know what was written in the words. Gahan only knew that this was an extremely powerful sword. From what Gahan could feel on his skin, the power contained in the sword's blade was thousands, tens of thousands of times more than the Juzi's sword. Gahan could not confirm how powerful the sword was, because the sword's power had already surpassed the limit that Gahan could sense. Thousands of times was only Gahan's guess. Could it be that this is the Emperor's sword that His Majesty Hao Tian mentioned? Gahan muttered to himself absent-mindedly. Jindy's senses could not be wrong. Jindy said that an Emperor's sword would be born in the training array, so there was an 80 to 90% chance that there really was a Jindy here. Combined with the power that Gahan could not estimate, Gahan was already 70 to 80% sure that this was the strongest power that humans could control, and it was also the Emperor's sword that protected the survival and development of humans at the end of the world. Emperor's sword, the sword's sword. This was a term that could make all sword bearers excited just by hearing its name. This was a sword lady that 999% of sword bearers could only look up to in their lifetime, and they would not even have the chance to see it. This was the thing that all sword bearers yearned for the most. Even in their next life, the next life after that, even if they had to work hard for others for dozens or hundreds of lifetimes, they would still be willing to obtain it. And now, this thing was in the hands of Gahan. Thinking of this, Gahan could not help but tremble. It would be great if this was my own sword lady, Gahan thought, but he knew that this was impossible. The Juzi sword could be in Gahan's hands, and others would not blame Gahan for anything, because this was the sword lady that Gahan had discovered. Gahan had the right to keep it as his own item while he was still alive. Only after Gahan died, Sword Pavilion would forcefully take back the sword lady. However, if this was really an Emperor's sword, then Gahan would not keep it by his side at all, because Sword Pavilion would definitely not allow an Emperor's sword lady to be kept as a collection by a sword bearer. This kind of important human weapon could only be kept in the hands of Sword Pavilion, and wait for the Emperor's sword to awaken and begin to wander the world. The unknown Emperor's sword in Gahan's hands had to be handed over to Sword Pavilion for safekeeping after Gahan returned to the base city, so it was not considered as Gahan's own. This was probably the reason why I Ching had not mentioned this Emperor's sword from the beginning to the end. In her eyes, this Emperor's sword did not belong to Gahan, so she would not tell Gahan any detailed information about this Emperor's sword. In fact, she did not care about this Emperor's sword at all. No, I Ching should be most concerned about this Emperor's sword. Gahan's heart skipped a beat, and he could not help but recall the process of discovering this Emperor's sword. When I Ching's body completely melted, Gahan vaguely heard a clang. However, at that time, Gahan was immersed in his grief for I Ching, so he did not pay attention to the source of the sound. After thinking about it, he realized that the sword was on the sofa, and when Gahan picked up the melted I Ching, the sword was definitely not on the sofa. This sword should have appeared when I Ching's voice disappeared, and the clang was the sound of the sword falling on the sofa. This meant that the sword was very likely hidden in I Ching's body. In fact, I Ching's candy body was not as simple as a body. she was a container. I Ching's body was like amber, and her body was wrapped around the Emperor's sword in Gohan's hand. Gohan even suspected that Zhetian Jindy had created this candy I Ching's body to hide this Emperor's sword. If one knew that Emperor's swords were usually hidden in unknown, mysterious places, and only when the Emperor's sword wanted to appear, would it appear in the human world. Awaken. Then, it would release a brilliant sword light. The Emperor's sword was like a strong magnetic point that emitted strong electromagnetic waves, and it could attract the attention of all Emperor's sword wielders and Emperor's sword wielders at all times. Once this Emperor's sword appeared, in Jindy's eyes, it would be as dazzling as the sun in the sky, even if it was thousands of miles away. It was impossible for them not to discover the existence of this Emperor's sword. In reality, Gohan seemed to be able to feel two untraceable and bright gazes from Yinjing City and London City. Their gazes were focused on the Emperor's sword in Gohan's hand. Hence, if one wanted to hide this sword, they had to use special materials to seal it. This should be the reason for Candy I Ching's existence, which was to seal this sword, so that other Jindy would not be able to find any trace of this sword. Gohan, do you have any clothes? Pin wants to change. It's so dirty. Guyan wants to change too. We want to wear the panda clothes. Pin and Guyan ran over hand in hand, interrupting Gohan's thoughts. Gohan lowered his head and saw that Pin and Guyan's bodies were black. A crocodile and a shark, which were originally green and blue, had turned black. It looked as if they had been soaked in black ink. Gohan, you can't blame us. We were playing happily with the rabbits and foxes in the bushes when they suddenly turned into black water and dirted our clothes. We really didn't roll around on the ground. Pin explained with an innocent face. If her body was not covered in mud, Gohan would definitely believe her. Of course, this was not the main point. As far as Gohan could see, the entire fairy tale kingdom had begun to collapse. All the animals had disappeared, the originally green grass had become scorched black, and all the leaves on the trees had fallen, turning the place into a barren army. Even the artificial sun and stars in the sky had begun to flicker, as if the voltage was insufficient and could be extinguished at any time. This place is about to completely collapse. We have to leave. Itian had also returned to Gohan's side. Her body was also soaked in black water. Could it be that she had also been playing with a rabbit in her arms? All right, Gohan didn't have the time to guess Itian's maiden's heart. He looked at the collapsing scene around him with a sense of loss, then bowed his head and said, "Goodbye." He touched the green stone ring on his finger, then disappeared with the sword lady. Chapter 429. Blessed Curls. Has an hour passed? Reinhardt, who was somewhat anxious, asked a small follower behind him. The little follower secretly rolled his eyes at Reinhardt and thought to himself, "Can't you display the time on your personal terminal? Do you have to ask me so that you can show me that I'm your follower?" Unfortunately, he only silently complained his heart because he knew that Reinhardt was a person that Long Sure Jindy valued very much. There were even rumors in London that Reinhardt was Long Sure Jindy's illegitimate son, which was why he valued him so much. In short, he didn't dare to confront Reinhardt face to face, so he could only glance at his own time, and then replied with a smile, "Boss, it's already 14:25. It's been 50 minutes since that kid entered the finish line." "Is that so? He's finally coming out." Reinhardt raised his eyebrows and secretly ordered Blessed Curls through his personal terminal. "You tell all the brothers to be on high alert, release the sword maidens, and listen to my command later, understand?" "Understood." Blessed Curls nodded, but then he was puzzled. "Big brother, that kid is just a civilian. Is it necessary to let all the brothers be on high alert? With Big Brother here, isn't a piece of cake. What do you know, that kid is not that easy to deal with." Reinhardt glared at Blessed Curls. "That kid could defeat that Yuan Ko boss. His strength is probably the strongest among all the people present. Not to mention me alone. Even if we go together, I'm afraid it will be somewhat dangerous. Moreover, that Liu Ling and that kid are together. I'm afraid that the people of Yinjing City will help him. Do you think our brothers can beat this group of people from Yinjing City?" as long as we work hard and be a little hot-blooded. Originally, Blessed Curls wanted to say that as long as one was hot-blooded, nothing was impossible, but after thinking about it, his legs trembled when he thought of the Lun Yin clan's billion sword skill. He was fortunate enough to see the billion sword skill. At that time, the sky was filled with tens of thousands of swords. That scene, he would never forget it for the rest of his life. Forget it. I'm afraid that I won't have time to remind you when the time comes. Tell our brothers to be more alert. If the situation is not right, we will defend with all our might. Do you understand? Defense? Shouldn't everyone be attacking? Blessed Curls suddenly didn't understand what Reinhardt was trying to say. You don't need to know. You just need to pass on the message. After saying that, Lionheart didn't say another word to Blessed Curls, because at this time, the entire trial hall began to shake. Then a crack appeared in the space. Gahan took Qingpin and Etion and jumped down from this crack. Boy, you're finally willing to come out. Seeing Gahan appear, Reinhardt took the lead and jumped in front of Gahan. Then he saw the golden sword in Gahan's hand and was stunned. It's her. That's right, it's her. It's exactly the same as the picture His Majesty showed me. This is the Emperor's sword hidden here. Reinhardt swallowed a mouthful of saliva. His whole body was excited. Reinhardt, was actually lucky enough to see the Emperor's sword with his own eyes. Moreover, he was so close to the Emperor's sword. As long as he stretched out his hand, the Emperor's sword would be in his hand. Reinhardt stretched out his hand on the spot, wanting to take the Emperor's sword in Gahan's hand. Pa! A loud sound was heard, and a long red and swollen mark appeared on Reinhardt's face. This was because Etion saw that Reinhardt's pig hand was about to make a move, so she couldn't help but slap Reinhardt's face with the blade of her sword. You've got guts. Reinhardt's face was swollen like a monkey's butt. It could be seen how powerful Etion's slap was. It was so painful that Reinhardt almost cried. This heroine has even beaten Jation Jindy. Do you think I'm afraid of an idiot like you? If you know what's good for you, then take back your pig trotters and get lost from this heroine's eyes. Etion scolded him mercilessly. Reinhardt's breath was stuck in his throat, and he almost couldn't spit it out. As the saying goes, don't expose a person's shortcomings and don't hit a person's face in a fight. Reinhardt had lived for so long, but he had never been hit in the face. This made Reinhardt so angry that he wanted to fight with Gahan on the spot. However, there was one thing that Reinhardt couldn't understand. How could Etion break through his personal shield and hit his face? It should be known that Reinhardt was already prepared. He was already holding the sword lady in his hand, and his personal shield had already been activated. Etion's sword could only hit his personal shield, and it was impossible for it to hit his face. Here, I'll return it to you. This sword is quite useful, and it feels great to use. At this time, Etion handed the sword back to Gahan. Gahan didn't say anything. He just smiled and put the sword back into his dimensional pocket. However, in that instant, Lionheart was able to clearly see what Etion had handed to Gahan. It turned out that what Etion had used to hit him wasn't her heavenly sword at all, but a toy sword made of wood. Because it was a toy sword, it was impossible for it to be imbued with something like sword essence. Therefore, the sword didn't trigger the personal shield's automatic protection function, and it directly hit Reinhardt's face. Damn it! Reinhardt continuously gritted his teeth. Surnamed Goo, is this how you restrain your sword lady? I didn't do anything, but your sword lady indiscriminately attacked her comrade. In your eyes, do you still have a law of a sword wielder? Do you even have the slightest bit of comradeship? This Reinhardt was quite good at talking. He directly put a hat on Guhan's head that disregarded the law and the comradeship of his comrades. Don't look down on this hat. If this hat was really worn, Gahan would suffer. Because what Reinhardt said was the truth. Although Reinhardt didn't ask for Gahan's opinion and wanted to touch Gahan's Emperor's sword, which was a very taboo thing to do, it wasn't to the extent that Gahan could hurt him. At most, Gahan could only explicitly reject Reinhardt. This was like asking someone to borrow money, but not only did the other party refuse to lend it to you, but he also directly beat you up. Although the one who did it was Gohan's sword lady and not Gohan himself, the sword lady and the sword wielder were on the same side. If the Discipline Committee of the Communist Party carefully examined the law and decided to sentence him, not to mention anything else, he would be sent to jail for around 2 years. Hearing Reinhardt's words, Gohan didn't reply. His expression didn't change either, and he maintained a look of silence. Gohan's original intention was to disdain talking to Reinhardt, but Reinhardt mistakenly thought that Gohan was afraid. He immediately sneered. "Brat, give me the sword in your hand, and I'll forget about this matter. I won't go to the Discipline Committee of the Communist Party to complain about you. How about it? This is a very good deal. You won't be able to use that sword for the rest of your life. So why not give it to me and save yourself a few years in the Discipline Committee of the Communist Party's prison?" Reinhardt's threatening posture towards Gohan was extremely ugly, and the sword wielder from the other cities couldn't stand it anymore. The way Reinhardt was drooling over the sword in Gohan's hand was clearly telling them that the sword was the most precious treasure in the trial formation, an Emperor's sword lady. "Miss Ling, the Emperor's sword can't be taken by the people of London City. When I came, Hao Tianjin sent me a message telling us to do our best to bring this Emperor's sword back to Yuzhong City. We must get that sword before Reinhardt does. Once the sword is in Reinhardt's hands, it will be very difficult for us to get it back." A Yinjing City sword wielder moved closer to Liuyan Ling and whispered into her ear. It seemed that Yinjing City was also determined to get this Emperor's sword. This was very normal. The other cities were also drooling over the Emperor's sword in Gohan's hands, wishing that they could have it in their own hands. However, they didn't have the Emperor's sword behind them, so they had to be cautious at this time. If they didn't force out the trump card in Reinhardt's hands, no one was willing to stand out. No need. That sword is the safest in Gohan's hands. If Reinhardt wants to snatch something from his hands, he won't be able to without paying a sufficient price. At that time, it won't be too late for us to make a move," Liuyan Ling said lightly. Even a fool could guess that Reinhardt was so arrogant because Longshu Jindi had given him something. Now, it was up to Gohan to deal with this difficult problem. Before Gohan was in danger, Liuyan Ling didn't intend to make a move. "TSK, you fat pig, shut up for this heroine. This heroine will take responsibility for this matter alone. The person who hit you is me. If you have the guts, let your sword lady fight with me." In the face of Reinhardt's coercion, Etion spat on the ground and took all the responsibility on herself. "Etion," Gohan sighed and said, "You used too little strength just now. It's best to slap his mouth until he can no longer speak. That way, you don't have to listen to a wild boar's crazy barking here." "Gohan." Etion turned around and saw Gohan's face filled with gentleness. Etion imagined it, as she said to him, "Good, good, good." Reinhardt said "good" 3 times with a ferocious expression. He then turned to look at Liuyan Ling behind him. "Miss Liuyan Ling, I, Reinhardt, request a duel with this person. This matter concerns the dignity of the City of London. You have no right to refuse." As mentioned before, the Liuyan family had the right to arbitrate. This right naturally included the right to arbitrate whether a duel could be carried out. Generally speaking, when 2 sword-bearers had an unavoidable conflict in the wild, they would have the right to start a duel. There were many factors that would determine whether a duel was necessary. The dignity of the sword-bearers was one of the most important factors. Reinhardt had just been slapped in the face and insulted by Gohan. This was completely in line with the conditions for a duel. At this time, as long as Liuyan Ling nodded, the duel could start. "Mr. Gohan, do you agree to Mr. Reinhardt's request for a duel?" Since this duel was reasonable, Liuyan Ling could only confirm the matter with Gohan. "Sure, I have no objections," Gohan said calmly. Chapter 430. At this moment, the middle of the hall was empty. Only Reinhardt, Liuyan Ling, and Gohan were standing in the middle of the hall. This empty space was naturally prepared for the duel between Gohan and Reinhardt. "May I ask, Mr. Reinhardt, have you decided to start a duel with Mr. Gohan that concerns your dignity, and that you will completely submit to the result of the duel?" Liuyan Ling, who was standing between Gahan and Reinhardt, asked Reinhardt. This was a necessary step before the duel. They had to confirm the legality of the entire duel and the various conditions of the duel. The host of the duel would record the entire process and send it to the base city for archiving. This was to prevent anyone from going back on their word. I confirm. Reinhardt touched his red and swollen face and said while gritting his teeth. Then, Mr. Gahan, do you also agree to this duel and completely submit to the result of the duel? Liu Ling confirmed with Gahan. Gahan naturally agreed. Very well. Then, as for the rules of the duel, which duel rule do you two wish to use among the 7 duel rules? Liu Ling said again. The so-called duel rules, as the name suggested, referred to the various restrictions of the duel. The lowest level duel rule was the first level duel rule, which was the most restrictive. This duel rule only allowed the 2 sword bearers to use a sword maiden of the same level to fight. If the depth of the sword mark was different, then the depth of the sword mark must be limited to the level of the lower sword maiden. Apart from the sword maiden itself, no other props were allowed. They were not allowed to damage the durability of the sword maiden, and they were not allowed to attack the sword bearer. In short, this first level duel rule was the most restrictive and restrictive rule. I choose the 7th level duel rule. I don't know if Mr. Gahan has the guts to agree. Reinhardt said with a sneer. The 7th level duel rule was on the other end of the spectrum compared to the first level duel rule. Apart from not breaking the sword maiden and not harming the sword bearer's life, there were no other restrictions. If Reinhardt was willing, he could even cut off Gahan's hands and feet, then humiliate Gahan in all sorts of ways. In the end, he just had to throw Gahan into the medical pod to ensure that he wouldn't die. The 7th level duel rule was definitely a very cruel duel rule. In the entire human world, very few people would use the 7th level duel rule. Usually, duels started for the sake of dignity would choose the 5th level duel rule, which was to protect the opponent's body. The 7th level duel rule, which was cruel and absolute, would only be brought up when it involved the hatred of life. Of course, the 7th level duel rule was proposed by Reinhardt alone. Gahan could completely reject this rule and negotiate later. I'm fine with it. Gahan didn't reject it and directly agreed to Reinhardt's request. What a joke. Since the other party wanted to court death, there was no reason for Gahan not to welcome him warmly. Gahan was the real master of the green onion stone trial formation. As long as Gahan thought about it, hundreds of memory fragments would run over to help Gahan beat people up. Why would Gahan be afraid of Reinhardt? Haha, you got guts. If you weren't holding that sword in your hand, then I, Reinhardt, might even be willing to be friends with you. Reinhardt laughed out loud when he heard Gahan's promise. From Reinhardt's point of view, when Gahan agreed to the 7th level duel rule, the victory of this duel was already in Reinhardt's hands. Then the last question. Liu Ling clapped her hands. As a duel, there must be rewards and punishments for the duel. May I ask where the rewards and punishments for the duel? I want him to hand over the sword in his hand to me, then kneel on the ground and apologize for insulting the city of London. Reinhardt said first. What about you, Mr. Gahan? Liu Ling turned to ask Gahan. In the end, Gahan didn't say a word for a long time because Gahan didn't know what he wanted from Reinhardt. Gahan wasn't interested in making Reinhardt kneel and apologize to him. It didn't have any practical meaning. Gahan didn't know what Reinhardt had that was worth coveting. At this time, I Ching had given him 20 sword mark engravings, which made Gahan a tycoon. Gahan didn't care about what Reinhardt had. Tell me, what do you want? Seeing that Gahan didn't speak for a long time, Reinhardt became anxious. He thought that Gahan had gone back on his words and didn't want to duel with him. If that was the case, Reinhardt would have to take action by force and snatch the Emperor's sword from Gahan's hands. Although this was similar to a duel where he would have to fight with Gahan, Reinhardt's reputation would probably become unbearably bad in the eyes of the other sword-bearers if he snatched it without any reason. In fact, most of this duel was deliberately led by Reinhardt in order to reasonably and legally snatch the Emperor's sword from Gahan's hands. Although Long Sure Jindy had taken the blame for him, Reinhardt still didn't want to ruin his reputation if he could. How about this if I, Reinhardt, lose? I will hand this person over to you. You can do whatever you want to me. You can do whatever you want to me. What do you think?" In order to let the duel go smoothly, Reinhardt took the initiative to put forward such a proposal. Guhan definitely had no interest in Reinhardt, but his words made Guhan's mind light up. Perhaps this Reinhardt really has his own use. My request is that if I win, then Reinhardt will be mine. Guhan finally gave his promise. Very good. Then, Mr. Guhan, Mr. Reinhardt, do you have any objections to your rewards and punishments? Liu Ling finally confirmed. No objections. No objections. Then I announced that under the witness of the 29th generation successor of the Liu clan, Liu Ling, Mr. Guhan from Yuzhong City, and Mr. Reinhardt from London will have a fair duel established under the level 7 duel rules. In this duel, both sides can use any swordplay, any weapon, any tool, any tactic, any strategy to cause damage to any part of the opponent as long as they don't break the opponent's swordplay or kill the opponent. This duel will continue until one side loses the ability to fight or surrenders. If Reinhardt is the winner, he will receive the golden swordplay from Guhan and a kneeling apology. If Guhan is the winner, he will receive the right to use Reinhardt's body. After Liu Ling finished her speech, Reinhardt quickly entered his battle state because the duel had already begun. Sacred, glory, death, vermilion, Aaron, incest, the falling, fallen, blessing, protection. Suddenly, Lionheart's style changed. He stuck the huge sword in his hand into the ground and started to chant strange English words loudly and clearly. Although Reinhardt was a Londoner, 95% of the English people had probably forgotten how to speak English in this era where Mandarin was the king. Only the most ancient English aristocratic families still mastered this traditional English language. It seemed like Reinhardt was already very familiar with these words. When he chanted them, it made people's blood boil. It would be a pity if he didn't become a voice actor in a hot-blooded anime. Speaking of which, it had been a long time since Guhan had heard such a Chinibu explanation. Generally speaking, only the Chinibu used in the game would like to say such shameful Chinibu explanations when they liberated the sword lady. In real life, the wielder of a sword would never do such a thing. This wasn't because of face, but because the song was not only long, but also had to be accompanied by a rhythmic tone and movements. It might even take more than 10 seconds to chant. If there was so much time, Yuan Ko would have already rushed to the side of the sword wielder and killed him. Therefore, sword wielders in real life wouldn't bother with things like song interpretation. He didn't expect Reinhardt to like this kind of thing. Fortunately, this was a duel. Ordinary people wouldn't take advantage of this time to attack. Otherwise, Reinhardt would have been lying on the ground. Unfortunately, Guhan wasn't an ordinary person. Most importantly, he couldn't stand someone chanting such a Chinibu song in front of him, and he could only watch like an idiot. Therefore, when Reinhardt chanted the fourth word, the heavenly sword moved. The heavenly sword was already in a liberated state. Guhan had even skipped the step of liberating the sword lady. The heavenly sword's figure flashed, and in less than 2 seconds, it appeared in front of Reinhardt. It raised its heavenly sword and was about to slash at Reinhardt's head. What a fast speed! Everyone who saw this scene narrowed their eyes. At this moment, the distance between Guhan and Reinhardt should be the official standard for a duel between sword bearers of the sword tier, which was 100 meters. However, the Heaven-Reliant sword had actually used only 2 seconds to reach Reinhardt. This speed was practically like that of a ghost. My dear brother, did I remember wrong? Didn't they say that the maximum speed of a sword wielder is 20 meters per second? How can this swordplay be so fast? Mylan, one of the leaders of the Buenos Aires army, asked her brother in a panic. This speed was too terrifying for a sword maiden of the treasure sword rank. My dear sister, I don't know either, Messi said bitterly. But this Yuzhong man's sword maiden is the heaven-relieving sword. The heaven-relieving sword is comparable to the top-ranking sword maidens. If the heaven-relieving sword is improved to the 1st grade, it's not impossible for him to reach his current speed. It's deep into the 1st grade. Melon didn't know if she should open her mouth or close it. As the leader of the Buenos Aires army, her sword wielder was only deepened to the 3rd grade. Melon really couldn't afford the rest of the sword marks. Brother, can you defeat him? Can we defeat him together? Melon originally wanted to ask if her brother could defeat Gahan. Perhaps she felt that it was impossible, so she changed her question to whether the two of them could defeat Gahan together. Be reasonable, my dear sister, Messi said very seriously. We should be friends with him. Why must we be enemies? A great man from the East once said, politics is to make more friends for yourself and fewer friends for your enemies. I think this is the most correct principle in the world. Chapter 431. Oh my God, what happened to Heavenly Sword in the past 10 days? Heavenly Sword is now 3 times faster than when it was fighting Ashima. Liu Ling couldn't help but exclaim in admiration when she saw Heavenly Sword's speed. She was the person who understood Gohan's combat strength the most. She had watched the entire battle with Ashima and found that Heavenly Sword's speed had increased by 3 times. No wonder Heavenly Sword is so strong after a month. So this is the reason. The other person who was familiar with Gohan's combat strength was Ashima. As Gohan's direct opponent, she felt that Heavenly Sword was even stronger than Liu Ling previously. She couldn't understand how Etion could become so strong after a month. Now that she saw Etion's terrifying movement speed, she understood. It seemed like this improvement had happened in a short span of 10 days. Could it be that Gohan has already reached the level of a famed sword wielder in the past 10 days? That's impossible. There's no way to increase sword essence in this trial formation. At first, Ashima suspected that Gahan had become a famed swordsman in the past 10 days. However, it was impossible to replenish sword essence in this trial formation. There was no real Yuan-ko here. Of course, Gahan hadn't reached the level of a famed swordsman. In fact, apart from synchronizing with the Doyu sword and gaining 1,000 quarks of sword essence, Gahan hadn't gained a single quark of sword essence. Currently, he had around 4,000 sword essence in his body. Heavenly Sword hadn't reached the level of a grade 1 famed swordsman either. Although I Ching had given Gahan enough sword essence to reach the level of a grade 1 sword essence, it would take a lot of time. Gohan had returned directly after leaving Fairy Tail Valley, so where would he have the time to give Heavenly Sword essence? The real reason why Heavenly Sword's strength had changed so much was naturally because of the yin-yang swordsmanship technique. Even though Gahan's Doyu sword was hidden in his dimensional pocket, the attribute enhancement from the two still existed on Gohan and Heavenly Sword. For the Sword Maiden, the sum of 2 wasn't as simple as 2. In reality, the combat power displayed was almost 3 times that of the original. Even the spectating sword-bearers felt their hearts palpitate at the terrifying power of 3 times their strength. What about Lionheart, who was being attacked by the Heavenly Sword? This person was completely dumbfounded. When the Heavenly Sword attacked, Reinhardt was still thinking of using this opportunity to finish chanting the sword scripture. In any case, it would take at least 7 or 8 seconds. However, Reinhardt immediately regretted it. In the blink of an eye, the Heavenly Sword was already in front of him. Reinhardt was not an idiot, and he did not have the habit of wasting his time. He decisively gave up on chanting the sword hymn and immediately poured the sword essence into the greatsword in his hand. With a flash of red light, a sword lady dressed in blood-red armor appeared beside Reinhardt. Unfortunately, the sword lady appeared too late. She had only just opened her eyes to take a good look at her surroundings when the Heavenly Sword's blade had already arrived beside Reinhardt. Then, it stabbed into Reinhardt's head. Reinhardt could only feel his head buzzing as if there were countless flies flying around. The entire world became dark and trembled. Reinhardt knew that he had been attacked in an important part of his body, such as his temple, heart, and so on. These parts of his body had relatively weak shields. Once he was attacked, he would feel great discomfort. Red Hilt, help me stop her. I need time. The moment he was sent flying, Reinhardt used the last of his strength to order his Red Hilt to protect him. Red hilt was the sword of Galahad, one of the 12 knights of the Round Table under King Arthur's command. It belonged to the 12 knights of the Round Table series of sword maidens, who all wore medieval knight armor. Red hilt's armor was rather unique. It was different from the other knights of the Round Table, which focused on defense. Red hilt's armor seemed lighter and thinner, as if it was a defective product that had been skimped on. Many parts of her body were exposed. Only the armor on her back was extremely thick. Just by looking at it, one could tell that this part of the armor had terrifying defensive power. Red hilt's main body, Red hilt, had a unique appearance. Rather than a sword, it was better to call it a large cross. It was inlaid with all kinds of gems and emitted a dazzling light. Yes, my dear friend. Red hilt's eyes flashed with a blood-red light. She then stood in front of Reinhardt and held the cross in front of her. Stop, sister. If you dare to take one more step towards my dear friend, you'll have to bear the endless attacks of Red hilt. Who the hell are you? Get out of my way. I don't know you. Heavenly Sword glanced at Red hilt casually and was about to continue looking for trouble with Reinhardt, who was lying on the ground recovering. Naturally, Red hilt wouldn't let Heavenly Sword pass. She firmly blocked Heavenly Sword's path. A mere Redford sword dares to compete with me. How you Etion swung his sword horizontally and slashed towards Red hilt. Etion did not increase his sword speed. He just calmly slashed forward. In front of my Red hilt holy light, all evil will turn into sheep, Red hilt muttered. The many gems on Red hilt's sword began to emit laser-like rays of light towards Heavenly Sword in front of her. What kind of light is this? Heavenly Sword instantly stopped when it saw the light shining on its body. It was as if its pressure points had been poked. Arrogant fool. How can you be a match for me, Red hilt? On the other hand, seeing that Heavenly Sword had stopped, Red hilt revealed a satisfied smile. The light just now was her basic skill, Petrify Curse. It could petrify an opponent for a whole 10 seconds. Moreover, this curse would definitely succeed against an opponent of the same level. Let me end you now with my Rock Crush. The hilt of the Red hilt flashed with a crimson light, and then the two guards separated from the hilt. In an instant, they shot towards the petrified sky Reliance like arrows from a bow. This was Red hilt's advanced skill, Rock Crush. It could separate the two handguards from the sword hilt and launch a powerful attack. The strength of this attack was that it had a chance of triggering the Rock Crush effect. When her opponent was petrified, they would receive 1000% damage. This was already enough to instantly kill many Yuan Ko of the same level. As such, Red hilt was filled with confidence. She felt that this annoying Dongfang sword lady would definitely not be a match for her. If she knew that her opponent was actually Heavenly Sword, and a Heavenly Sword that had been strengthened by 3 times, she would definitely not think this way. What the hell is this? Heavenly Sword, who was originally petrified, suddenly swung the Heavenly Sword in her hand. The two handguards that had shot out were sent flying hundreds of meters away. The speed at which they were sent flying was even faster than the speed at which they were flying towards Heavenly Sword. What a powerful opponent. Heaven's Stairway. Only now did Red hilt realize how powerful her opponent was. The petrifying combo that had never failed in the past had actually failed. Red hilt panicked and immediately prepared to use her ultimate skill, Heaven's Stairway. Heaven's Stairway was Red hilt's ultimate skill. It actually projected an extremely long, illusory stairway in the sky that seemed to reach the clouds. Once the stairway was formed, she would be able to 100% lock onto her opponent and bring them to Heaven's Stairway. How was it? Didn't it sound like it was going to explode the heavens? Heavens, has Red hilt been forced out of Heaven's Stairway? Looks like Red hilt is going to go all out. Stop looking. Heaven's Stairway has already appeared. This sword lady is going to lose for sure. The London sword bearers all discussed amongst themselves. They felt that Gahan was about to lose. This was because their impression of Heaven's Stairway was just too deep. Lionheart had relied on this move to sweep through London. The effect of Heaven's Stairway was indeed very powerful. By consuming the energy of her personal shield, She could directly deal true damage equivalent to the energy of her personal shield to her opponent. It was equivalent to using Red Hilt's personal shield energy to exchange for the opponent's personal shield energy. After Lionheart became a sword-level swordsman, he relied on his family's power and spent a lot of money to upgrade the Red Hilt sword to Grade 1, awakening the Red Hilt sword's ultimate skill. He was the only one of a kind among all the young sword-level swordsmen in London. In addition, Red Hilt had reached level 1. In terms of defense, none of the young sword-rank swordbearers in London could surpass Red Hilt in defense. Therefore, Red Hilt's ultimate skill became a legend in London. No sword lady could resist Red Hilt's ultimate skill. This was also the reason why Lionheart was unbeatable in London. It was because his sword Scar Profound was too high level, and his ultimate skill was too overpowered. However, it was a pity that Red Hilt had picked the wrong opponent this time. She shouldn't have picked on Heavenly Sword. Etion's lips curled up into a disdainful smile as he looked at the flight of stairs that was gradually extending to his feet. The Heavenly Sword in his hand trembled a little and left an afterimage on the stairs. In an instant, the sword burst like a soap bubble. My kingdom of heaven's stairway has been slashed apart. Red Hilt's sword was terrified. To be able to destroy his ultimate move with one slash meant that the opponent's swordsmanship had reached an extremely shocking level, able to tear apart the entire space at an extremely fast speed. Only then could it be possible to destroy the illusion of his kingdom of heaven's stairway. Red Hilt had no way of resisting such power. In reality, Red Hilt did not resist at all. Although Red Hilt was a knight's equipment, she relied on her skills like a mage. She did not have much knowledge in swordsmanship, and was probably no better than King Yu, who had forgotten his own swordsmanship. Thus, when all of her skills were nullified, Hong Hilt's sword could only wait for death. The heaven-reliant sword slashed down on her chest, sending her flying. As she flew through the air, her body disappeared, and she reverted back to a sword covered in cracks. Because Red Hilt had used up all of her shield's energy to use the Heaven Stairway, her personal shield had already disappeared when Heavenly Sword struck her, and Heavenly Sword's attack had directly hit her body. If Heavenly Sword hadn't discovered that her personal shield had disappeared and was scared into withdrawing part of her sword essence, Red Hilt would have been slashed in half. However, even though Heavenly Sword had withdrawn its power, Red Hilt was still heavily injured. Looking at the cracks on her blade, around 50% of her durability had been lost. You're next. Stay there and don't move. Let me slap the other side of your face until it's swollen, and I'll allow you to surrender. Heavenly Sword chuckled, looking extremely arrogant. Lionheart did not notice that he had secretly taken out a small item from his dimensional pocket after recovering his consciousness during the precious battle. Chapter 432. Reinhardt, do you know why we're going to Chanyao Mountain this time? In a huge living room, Longsher Jindy was sitting on the sofa, watching the variety show run, sword bearer, in front of him very seriously. Behind him, Reinhardt was standing there respectfully. It is to rescue Miss Liunying Ling, and to obtain the sword lady of the Emperor's sword level. Reinhardt replied, It seems that you are very clear about your mission. This is very good. Then let me ask you again, do you have the confidence to rely on your own ability to get that Emperor's sword from the other 7 base cities? Longsher Jinny asked. Yes. Reinhardt gritted his teeth and thought for a long time. He felt that he could not lose his momentum in front of Longsher Jindy, so he spat out the word yes. You have a fart. A cup of hot tea flew towards Reinhardt's face. Normal people would instinctively avoid him when they saw this situation. However, Reinhardt did not dare to move. He stood straight and let the teacup hit his face. The hot tea poured on his skin, burning red spots one after another. Reinhardt's face looked as if he had red measles. Reinhardt, you are just a piece of trash. Even if you rely on your Red Hilt sword to obtain the achievement of the best sword-level person, you are still a piece of trash. Longsher Jindy's words were like a basin of cold water, completely dousing the heart of Reinhardt, who was originally excited because of seeing Longsure Jiendi. I will only let you go, Reinhardt, because there is no one among the sword bearers of the sword level. Remember, you must bring that sword back to me this time. Even if you face the siege of the 7 cities, you must bring the Emperor's sword back to London. Do you understand? Yes, Your Majesty. Reinhardt will bring back the Emperor's sword, even if he has to risk his life. Reinhardt knelt behind Longsure Jiendi and deeply buried his originally arrogant head. Life? Those people will not want your life, and your life is not worth much. Not to mention the 7 cities. You can't be a match for Liu Ling alone. Longsure Jiendi threw a small gourd in front of Reinhardt. Take her with you. Once that Emperor's sword appears, crush this gourd. You don't have to worry about the rest. After speaking, Longsure Jiendi waved his hand. His butler came to Reinhardt's side and took him away from Longsure Jiendi's imperial palace. I thought that only Liu Ling could suppress me, so I planned to use this thing when facing Liu Ling. I didn't expect that such a monster would appear in Yuzhong City. It's really ridiculous. Reinhardt smiled bitterly in his heart. Although he didn't want to use this item bestowed by Longsure Jiendi on Gahan, seeing that the red-hilt sword that he was so proud of had been defeated by the heavenly sword without even using its big move, Reinhardt knew that it was impossible for him to defeat Gahan. He could only use Longsure Jiendi's trump card. Please, Your Highness Durandal. Reinhardt knelt on the ground and hurriedly crushed the small gourd given to him by Longsure Jiendi before Heavenly Sword could attack him. This is the power of an immortal sword. As Reinhardt crushed the small gourd in his hand, Heavenly Sword, who was already in front of Reinhardt, had goosebumps all over her body. She could feel the unique power of an immortal sword maiden from Reinhardt's small gourd. Knock Reinhardt out first. As long as he faints, we'll win. Heavenly Sword's face was as calm as water, but she remained calm at this critical juncture. She knew that the way to victory was not to defeat Reinhardt's immortal sword maiden, but to defeat Reinhardt himself. As long as she could knock Reinhardt out in time, even if Reinhardt summoned the Emperor's sword maiden, victory would still belong to Heavenly Sword Maiden. Therefore, Heavenly Sword did not care about what would come out of Reinhardt's gourd. Instead, she struck Reinhardt's temple with all her might. As long as Reinhardt fainted, everything would be settled. However, Heavenly Sword was still a step too slow. The immortal sword maiden in the gourd had finally woken up. With a clang, Heavenly Sword was blocked by a sword. Then, that sword was pushed back slightly. Heavenly Sword was like a soccer ball that had been kicked away. It flew over 100 meters towards Gahan's position and landed right in front of Gahan. That's right. This is the power of an immortal sword. What a detestable power. Heavenly Sword spat on the ground. Just one strike had caused her personal shield to lose around half of its energy. No, this is not the power of an immortal sword. This formation does not allow immortal sword maidens to enter. The thing that I Ching left behind doesn't have such a big loophole. Gahan patted Heavenly Sword's body and smoothed out the creases in her clothes. However, his eyes were fixed on the immortal sword maiden in front of Reinhardt. Just like the red-hilt sword, this immortal sword maiden was also dressed like a knight. Her pitch-black armor reflected the specks of light, like the starry sky in the night sky. This immortal sword maiden had a grave and stern expression. Her body was straight and firm like a poplar in the desert. His legs were not tight. There was not even a sliver of gap. The knight's armor was also polished and shiny. It was worn in the most correct position without the slightest bit of crookedness. Her sword and her legs were slightly slanted. If one used an angle ruler to measure it, one would find that the sword and her legs formed a 15-degree angle. Everyone who saw this immortal sword maiden for the first time would involuntarily have the same thought. This is a real knight. Although many immortal sword maidens use the posture of a knight as their first form, only this immortal sword maiden in front of them had the perfect appearance of a knight. She was the role model for countless knights. She was known as the #1 holy knight. She was one of the 3 holy swords of Europe, Durandal. It's you, Durandal. Long time no see. Etienne seemed to be very familiar with her opponent. In a flash, She appeared in front of Durandal and looked at her with a smile. "Yes, long time no see, Lady Etion." Durandal nodded slightly at Etion. It was another extremely standard knight's bow that could be measured with a ruler. After 700 years, Lady Etion is still as elegant as ever. "You too, Durandal. 700 years have passed, yet you haven't changed at all. You're still the same old fogey." Etion's words contained a hint of ridicule. If the way of knights cannot be followed, then there is no value in the existence of knights. Durandal's expression was always solemn. There had never been any change in her expression. Durandal was one of the most famous immortal sword maidens. She was the most memorable immortal sword maiden. She was different from the lazy heavenly sword maidens who had only appeared 3 times in 1,000 years. Durandal could be said to be a model sword maiden. She was known as the sword maiden who never slept. In these 1,000 years, she had slept for less than 10 years. She had a total of 21 sword bearers, and the average time she slept was only half a year. She could be said to be the most hard-working sword mistress who had sacrificed the most for humanity. Durandal had experienced 15 sword immortals and 6 genie swords. She had participated in almost all of humanity's major battles in the past 1,000 years. She had fought in more than 17,000 battles for humanity. She had killed more than 5 million Yuan Ko swords, been heavily injured more than 30 times, and almost broken 5 times. All of these achievements had caused every human to have an extremely respectful attitude towards Durandal. There had never been a sword maiden who had fought for humanity to this extent. If you don't believe me, you can look at the other sword maidens, including Gahan and Liunian Ling. All of the sword-tier sword maidens were kneeling on one knee, paying their utmost respect to Durandal with the etiquette of a knight. This was an honor that only Emperor sword maidens could receive. This represented the humans' recognition of Durandal. "Yeah, I haven't seen you for 700 years, and you've already received this kind of treatment." Seeing all the sword bearers kneeling down in respect to Durandal, especially Guhan kneeling down, Etion's heart began to ache. "Your subject fights as a knight, so naturally I should receive the etiquette of a knight. This is the glory of a knight, and also the meaning of your subject's existence." When Durandal said this, there was not a trace of change in her tone or expression. However, Etion could still hear a hint of pride in the other party's tone.